I always knew something was wrong, but the truth was far worse than I imagined. My mother, the woman I loved and trusted, was betraying us with the messenger. Each visit from him was a living nightmare, watching my father break more each time. One night I saw them together, the man who oppressed us defiling my mother. My rage turned into a burning desire for revenge. I swore to end his control and restore our family's honor. No more lies, no more suffering. Justice would be mine. There it was again, like a familiar friend coming back. It was clean, and it was pure. Hate. Besides the constant heat, it was the main feeling in my life, and it had been for years. This hate wasn't random. It was aimed at the thing on the horizon, coming toward the station. Some people saw it as a person, while others called it the messenger. For me, it was the thing. It had been tearing my family apart for as long as I could remember, and I had promised long ago that I would never forgive or forget. It didn't matter that the thing was the only reason we were here at this station, or that we had to follow its commands. One day, I would get my revenge, no matter what that might bring. My parents told me that there were many messengers, but only one came to our station. I knew this, even though I had never seen its face. All I could see now was a small cloud of dust, but I could feel the hate that usually lay underneath start to rise up and become stronger. I knew it was him. No one else ever came to this isolated station. The messenger station was the last place of civilization before the dangerous radiation zone began. It stood alone in the flat, endless desert like something out of place. It looked like a tiny, unbreakable black castle. That's exactly what it was. When I was a child, a man reached the station with his last bit of strength, having come from the radiation zone. Before he died, he told us about giant ruined cities there, but with no life. Since then, no one but the thing had arrived, and it had never gone any further. We were literally at the end of the world. Mom and Dad had already gone down to the courtyard to greet it in their usual, polite way, which felt so humble and wrong. I knew they had no choice, really. The thing was as powerful as a god. It was the Queen's agent, judge, and executioner. Our station existed to support it. Our lives had little value. They were somewhat comfortable because, for some reason, the Queen wanted this station to be here. But that didn't change my hate for the thing. My parents often said we were lucky. After all, we were alive. But what good was living if it meant putting ourselves down before this thing? I promised myself that one day my anger would get what it needed. In that promise was my only hope for respect. I knew that everyone in the few towns we knew about would kill us just to take our place here. But that didn't matter. This was about principles. I was 18, old enough to see the truth, and my clean, strong hate was unavoidable. I took one last look through the old telescope. Like many things around us, it was high-tech from before the war. Most of its advanced features were broken, but it still functioned as a regular telescope. Reluctantly, I left the lookout and headed toward the courtyard. They were expecting me, and this wasn't the time to show my plans, mainly because I had none. All I had were dreams of revenge and a belief that my chance would come. I didn't know how I knew that, and I didn't care. I just felt it. I walked into the hated courtyard where the gate was already open. My parents were waiting in the scorching heat for the thing to arrive. I was supposed to stand by their side and bow. I felt sick to my stomach, but I loved them and didn't want to make things harder, so I did what I had to do. As always, I felt a little hatred for myself for doing it. The Black Queen was pure evil, and the messengers we served were her most powerful tools. Black was the royal color. We poor people were not allowed to wear it. So the figure coming through the shimmering heat was all black. A black horse carried a figure in black clothes and a black cloak. The hood and mask with its sharply pointed nose must have been so uncomfortable in the heat. Inside, I smiled, picturing him sweating under that outfit. He wasn't very big and didn't stand out much either. Still, I had never seen anyone stand up to his power. The reason for that was on his right leg, the gun. Like all working guns in our world, it was high-tech. There were older, pre-war guns, but no one had ammunition for those anymore. The messenger's gun was huge, almost half a meter long and as thick as my arm. In the dark, you could see it glowing a faint blue, meaning it was ready to work for him. That blue glow was the real source of his and the Queen's power, but that didn't make it right. Nothing could. We stood in the courtyard silently, waiting for what would happen, like the servants we had become. I watched my parents trying to act like we were a happy family. The tension felt thick and heavy. My father was a shell of his former self, weak and broken like a dog waiting for a kick. Each visit from the messenger seemed to take more life from him. He looked older than his years, his eyes full of sadness that fed my anger each time I saw them. My mother stood there, looking pretty as always, with a tight smile on her face, as still as a messenger mask, pretending everything was fine. I tried to hold on to the last bits of my love for her. We all knew what was really happening, but we never talked about it. I understood that losing me was hurting her, but she was in the wrong, and I wouldn't make it easier for her. Finally, it rode into the courtyard like it owned the place, which was likely true. As usual, my father hurried to help him get off his horse, and just like always, he brushed my dad aside. My mother was there too, acting all nice and polite, smiling in a way that made me feel sick. I tried really hard not to throw up and kept my face neutral. As always, he ignored my parents and looked at me. I could see his light blue eyes behind his shiny black mask as he tried to stare me down. This was our usual greeting. Even though my parents told me to bow, I refused. His eyes seemed to find amusement in my defiance, like a cat playing with a mouse. I promised myself I would find a way to beat him. Unfortunately, to do that, I would have to fight against the entire kingdom, which felt like too much, even for a smart 18-year-old like me. But I could be patient. My anger toward him and the whole system would just keep growing. Sometimes, it felt like he could read my thoughts. If he could, he clearly found it funny because he chuckled before turning and walking to the messenger room. That messenger room was off limits for me. I knew every corner of the station, but that room was a mystery. In my imagination, it was a fancy place full of luxury, completely different from the plain parts of the station. Without speaking, we all left the courtyard to do our chores. My job was to care for the horse, and that was a good distraction from what I knew was coming. At bedtime, I couldn't help but peek down the hallway. I watched in horror as my mother left their bedroom and walked toward the messenger room. My heart sank as I heard my father crying in their bedroom. I felt a mix of anger and sadness that I didn't know how to direct. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. Just later, I told myself, my time would come. I felt helpless as I watched my mother go into the messenger room, choosing to be with someone else in a way that hurt us all. I felt she had betrayed me, my father, and herself. I believed my father had betrayed us too by accepting this, allowing himself to be lost in sadness. And I felt like I had betrayed myself by quietly going along with it. I hated them, and I hated myself, but most of all, I hated that man. One day, I swore I would get rid of him. Early the next morning, I prepared the messenger's horse like I was supposed to and left the stable quickly. It was important to avoid running into him, so I wouldn't do something foolish that would only help him. The less I interacted with him, the sooner he would leave. I planned to spend the day hiding to avoid seeing my parents, who I no longer respected. Suddenly, I realized the messenger was being chased. It was unbelievable. How could anyone attack a messenger? I couldn't believe it. I had heard stories of a group of rebels called the Reds that wanted to overthrow the Queen, but I never thought it would lead to something like this. Even if they succeeded, what would really change? But there it was happening right in front of me, and it made sense why my father had hurried away from his post. He had seen it happen, but since we didn't have weapons, he could only wait by the main gate to close it behind the messenger. I watched the chase for a moment, actually hoping they would catch him. I really wanted that to happen. I started to feel worried about the horse, one I had grown fond of over the years. My father rushed to help the man who had caused him so much pain. This was a perfect chance to get rid of him once and for all, but instead, my father chose to save him. Just a little more time and someone else could have handled it. Why did my father care so much about saving the man my mother was involved with? I could think of a few reasons, and none of them felt good. Maybe my dad was completely broken, which I had feared for a long time, or perhaps my mother reported to the Queen, and my dad knew he couldn't let that get out. Or even worse, he might fear my mother wouldn't forgive him for letting her lover die. Couldn't any reason give me a bit of hope for my parents? I felt the last shred of respect for them slip away. Then I heard a loud bang in the distance. Although I had never heard it before, I recognized it as a gunshot. I admired the brave people chasing the messenger. They were doing what I longed to do. They were fighting against the queen and her cruel followers. They weren't weak like my parents. I rushed down the narrow steel stairs to the main gate to see what was happening. My father had opened the gate, letting in gusts of hot air and dust into the courtyard. I had grown up seeing messengers come and go. They used to come often, but lately it felt like they'd been missing for months at a time. My father had said this was a sign that our world was falling apart, but we were too far away from everything to really understand what was happening. The only interesting events where we lived were when messengers came, and those visits followed a familiar routine. First, my father would open the gate. The messenger would ride in slowly, usually wrapped in dust to make it a bit dramatic. We would hold the reins and help him, but he mostly ignored us and headed straight into the messenger room. But this time was different and a bit messy. As soon as the gate opened, the messenger dashed through, looking back as if he were scared. An arrow was stuck in his bag. I was shocked to see this. Messengers were like heroes in our world, but this showed he was not invincible. My parents had already lost my respect, and now my view of the messenger was changing too. He rushed into the courtyard with his gun raised, looking back behind him. I had never seen anyone fire a gun before. People in the nearby village often said that just showing his gun could scare anyone into submission. But that didn't work this time. There was a loud bang as he fired his gun. He tried to shoot again, but the gun didn't work. He looked at it angrily as he hurried into the courtyard. He clearly knew how to use it and expected it to fire again, but it didn't. This confused me, but I had no time to think about it. He made his horse stop suddenly, just as my father slammed the gate shut and locked it. We could hear faint thumping from outside, but we felt safe because our station was strong. Still, the messenger kept glancing behind him, making him look less like the powerful figure he usually was. After catching his breath, he straightened up and tried to act tough again. For some reason, he looked straight at me, as if my reaction was important. I couldn't see his face. It was hidden behind a hood and a mask, but I thought he looked embarrassed. Shaking it off, he got off his horse and went to his room. Later, after I had taken care of his horse, I lay on my bed trying to sleep but couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. It was another sign that everything was changing, just like my father often said. The Red Rebels had chased and attacked a royal messenger in the middle of the day. I had heard whispers about this before, but now I had seen it myself. Something serious was happening outside, and it bothered me that I didn't know much about it. Whatever was going on, I felt like I was on the wrong side. Restless, I climbed up to the lookout platform to gaze at the stars, as I often did. I tucked myself into a cozy corner where the dark made the stars shine brighter. After a while, my father came up but didn't see me. I felt embarrassed when I saw him crying. It wasn't quiet. It turned into loud sobs. I was glad he didn't notice me there. That would have been too much. I didn't understand why he was acting this way. He had let my mother and the messenger have a secret relationship right in front of him. He missed his chance to get rid of the messenger. We both knew where my mother was at that moment because of his weakness. Why cry over things that couldn't be changed? I wished he could think more clearly. Still unable to fall asleep, I went back down to the courtyard, pretending to check on the horse just to keep busy. In the quiet darkness of the courtyard, time seemed to freeze. I loved that feeling. It felt perfect, far away from the troubles of my life. I wished it could last forever, but it was disturbed by a scratching sound that I couldn't identify. I opened the gate to see what was making the noise. There, lying in the dust, was a man in tattered red clothes. I quickly closed the gate again, unsure of what to do. I had only heard one gunshot during the chase, but this poor man had obviously been hit. His friends had left him behind to die. In a second, I decided that the Reds were no better than the Queen. Leaving someone to die was wrong. But what about me? Could I just leave him there? Our station was only for my family, messengers, and technically the Queen. No strangers were allowed. That was a strict rule. Yet there was a man dying outside who needed help. Who made those rules anyway? The Queen and the messenger who I disliked? My weak father and my mother who had betrayed him? Why should I care about their rules? I had a stronger sense of right and wrong than any of them. So I opened the gate. The man was barely awake, muttering something I couldn't understand. I couldn't treat his wound outside, so I pulled him into the stables, which I considered my space. The blood left behind didn't look good. I feared he might have died and felt a strange sense of relief. In the dim light of the stables, I finally looked at his wound. It was a clear shot to the stomach, and it looked really bad. I didn't know much about gunshot wounds, but this didn't seem good. I had some basic knowledge about medicine, but this was way too much for me. He surprised me when he suddenly started talking in a clear voice. "We almost got him, right?" He even tried to smile a little. "Yeah, you almost got him," I said, trying to sound hopeful. "Thanks for helping me." "Sure," I replied, even though I had no idea what to do next. "Why do you help me? You work for the Black Queen. We are supposed to be enemies." "I'm not working for anyone. I just grew up here. I never chose a side, but maybe today is that day." "What happened?" I noticed he was getting weaker. There wasn't much I could do but keep him company until he passed away. "The stupid messenger is having a secret relationship with my mother. It's tearing my father apart and ruining our family. I've watched this for a long time, but today I reached my breaking point." "Messenger? That's what you call them? We Reds call them cockroaches. Yours goes by the name Abagor. I think it's always the same one." "Yeah, as far as we know, it is. We've tried to catch him before, but he's clever. Today we tried to attack openly. Listen, I know I'm going to die." He coughed up some blood. "But it's totally worth it. He destroyed my family. Later we found out it was a mistake. He didn't care at all. I will kill him." "Girl, I'm serious." He looked into my eyes for a moment and nodded slightly. "Take this," he said, placing a glowing object in my hand. When I took it, the blue light shone brightly. It was way too bright for the dark barn. I wished it would dim, and it did right away. It felt almost like it listened to me. "You're a chosen one," he said weakly. Those were his last words, but he seemed oddly at peace. It was like he believed I would finish what he started, but I wasn't sure what that was. Kill Abagor? Kill all the messengers? Kill the queen? It all sounded tempting, but I had doubts about what would happen next. Still, something had to change. It was better to fight than to end up like my parents. I carried his body back through the main gate and wiped away any blood trails. I didn't want my father to find him and ask questions. Later, in my room, I lay on my bed, my heart racing. Finally, something was about to change. Anything was better than living a lie. Sleep was impossible, so I examined the object the Red had given me. It was dark, just like I had wished it to be in the barn. I still thought it was a coincidence, since it seemed impossible that I could control a high-tech item with my mind. In the barn, it looked like one piece, but up close I saw it was a dagger in a sheath. The colors and shapes were so similar it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. It felt surprisingly light. The dagger was completely black, not a hint of light reflected off it. It felt like a piece of reality was missing, replaced by black nothingness. One end was rounded and the other was sharp, smoothly changing between the two. Carefully, I pulled it out of the sheath. I expected to see a shiny blade, but it was just more blackness. I couldn't believe something so dark could cut anything. A quick test with my finger showed that the edge was dull. On a whim, I pushed it into the bed frame. To my shock, it went through the old wood like it was nothing. I quickly put it back in the sheath and tried to calm down. How was that possible? Even if the dagger was sharp, doing this with so little force should have been impossible. Of course, high-tech could feel like magic, so I shouldn't be surprised by this. Feeling more brave, I took it and told it to glow again. I could easily control the brightness. Even though I was scared of the dagger, it could work as a light. But then I remembered the blade wouldn't cut my finger, and the Red had called me a chosen one. I didn't know what that meant. Chosen for what? By whom? How did he know? Were there signs on my body? Too many questions. But as I drifted off to sleep, I felt that my time was coming, maybe soon. Our lives felt fake most of the time, but after each visit from a messenger, we lived in a slow nightmare for days. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the smiles were fake. My father was clearly sad, I was angry, and my mother pretended everything was fine. I spent most of my time in my room, the barn, or watching the stars from a high point, trying to think of a way to stop this madness. I tried not to hate my parents. I smiled at the right moments, but I didn't try to look real when I did. They knew I understood what was happening, and I wouldn't let them forget it. My sense of justice wouldn't let me. It was just awful. They talked and talked, but it was all nonsense. They avoided the big issue. There was no point in screaming in frustration or starting a big fight. I just stared into the distance while they kept going in the background. For once, I appreciated the empty landscape. It matched my mood perfectly. I felt like an old person who had seen enough of life to know that things were bad. I took a quick look at my mother. She wore a forced smile and gave my father fake, loving looks. Was this really how life was supposed to be? Did we all start out fresh, only to end up damaged, like the smiling liar sitting across from me? My father wasn't much better. When I was little, he was my hero. He could do anything and keep me safe from everything. Now, he looked like a broken man with sad eyes, pretending that all was well. He acted like he didn't know his wife was cheating on him with some guy just because he had a gun. He thought I didn't know and that I still respected him. I promised myself I wouldn't live like my parents. I would rather die first. I understood the basics of life. Most of it was boring and routine with just a few big moments here and there. I just had to make sure not to mess up when those moments came. It seemed so easy that I couldn't believe how my parents had failed. I could ask them, but what was the point? They weren't honest and wouldn't understand me anyway. When I couldn't stand their hidden sadness any longer, I jumped up to do something. Anything was better than sitting there. There were always chores to do. Anything was better than watching my father slowly fade away and seeing my mother, who caused this, act like everything was okay next to him. This time, no one followed the messenger. I didn't know if the Reds from before were still alive. I had a feeling they weren't. The Black Queen wasn't known for being nice. She wouldn't allow an attack like the one we had just seen. But I was just guessing. Maybe such things happened often, with a queen unable to do anything about it. The scene in the courtyard was as awkward and shameful as always. But this time, the messenger stared at me longer than usual, which made me uncomfortable. My mother watched from a distance, her fake smile still on her face. I realized I didn't really know my mother at all. If her true self was still there, it was buried under layers of pretending and that annoying smile. She felt like a stranger to me. Losing her like this must have hurt my father even more than her affair. At night, as I had done many times before, I hid in the hallway and waited for my mother. I had no plan, just a feeling that something had to change. I refused to live like this anymore. My mother came out of their bedroom wearing just a light robe and that same smile. I wanted to wipe that smile off her face, but forced myself to focus my anger on the messenger instead. My mother was weak, I thought. The messenger was the real problem. I wanted to remember his name when I finally confronted him. I considered going into his room right away, but decided to wait. I wanted to catch him when he was vulnerable, right after being with my mother. It usually only took a few minutes. After she returned to my dad, still in her robe and wearing that smile, I glanced at the closed door of the messenger's room. It looked like any other door in the building, plain and worn. For years, I didn't even want to look at that door. Touching it felt wrong, and opening it was completely out of the question. Only my mother ever went in there, to keep it clean and carry on with her affair. I had all sorts of wild ideas about the room behind that door. The imagination turned it into a grand hall filled with treasure, with the messenger sitting on a throne like a king. But as I grew up, I let go of most of those ideas, yet I still expected that room to be the best in the building. The truth was much more ordinary. The room was nearly empty and a little shabby, but it was very clean. There was just a bed and a wardrobe hanging with his black clothes and mask. To make it worse, there was no powerful man to be found. Instead, I saw a frail, older guy with a belly and a surprised look on his face. His appearance wasn't helped by the socks he wore or his silly comb-over. He didn't just look pale, his skin had a sickly yellow tint. Everything about him felt off, even the smell. I wondered how my mother could stand being with him. One thing was very clear. She didn't want him for his looks. This made what she did a little better in my eyes, but not by much. The only thing that looked powerful was the gun lying next to him on the bed. "Hey there, want to join us?" "You're right. It's about time. I would have invited you soon anyway. Just wait a minute. I need to catch my breath. Take off those clothes for me, will you? I want to see what you look like first." With that, he started to touch himself. I stood there, shocked and frozen. This is my favorite station. The entertainment is great, and it's even on the Queen's orders. What? I didn't understand what he meant. Yeah, she sent me to visit your parents ever since they arrived here. They are the only reason I come here. There's nothing else worth seeing in this dump. I heard your dad and the Queen were a couple once. It seems one of them cheated, and that's when things fell apart. I don't know why, but she sent them here when he got with your mother. A good way to get rid of someone, I guess. That's when she gave me this job. I don't get why, since I've never been a big hit with women, but the Queen told me exactly what to do with your mother. She was a lovely woman, and I had always liked that. It felt good for everyone involved. The Queen got what she wanted, and I had an easy job with some fun on the side. But my dad... What do you mean? He doesn't get anything. Who cares about him? He's lucky he has such a nice wife and a safe job. And my mom, too. He laughed a little. Yeah, she acts like she doesn't enjoy it, but I know she really does. Do you know this is wrong? Well, if I say it's wrong, then it is. I'm in charge here. Come here and I'll show you what else isn't wrong as long as I don't say it is. He stood up slowly, and I watched in disgust as his belly wobbled like it was alive. Luckily, it hid what I didn't want to see. To my shock, he moved toward me with a creepy smile. I backed up until I hit the door and cursed myself for closing it. But if it had been open, would it really have helped? My parents couldn't stop him anyway. I had to keep them out of this mess. We're going to have fun, little one. You're 18 now. You belong to me, just like your mother does. The Queen will be pleased. Stay away from me. I hated how my voice shook, sounding weak and scared. You're going to like it. Your mom does. Just think about how this will upset your father. It might even break him. I could smell his bad breath as he laughed. I might get a bonus from the Queen if it does. I felt gross when he grabbed my arms and pulled me toward the bed with surprising strength. Let me go. This is wrong, I begged, hating myself for begging. I'm in charge here, and I say it's a lesson. All I could picture was the sickening thought of him and the dagger hidden in my belt. They seemed meant for each other, but I couldn't do anything. He turned me around, held me tight from behind, and started to slobber on my neck. Then he grabbed my chest, and at that moment I pushed free and ran to the door. I had to make myself stay in the room. This had to end now, for my parents' sake. He watched me with real interest, like a shark eyeing its prey. Oh, this is good. It's more fun when they fight back a little. Yeah, I bet they all fight back. Look at you. You're ugly. No woman would want you around. He looked at me, shocked, clearly not used to hearing the truth. Then his smile returned. You know I might kill you, right? I haven't even decided if your parents will die, too. It depends on how much fun I have. If you are nice to me, maybe I won't. You monster! I wished I could think of something better to say, but that was all I could come up with then. Maybe. But I'm the one with the gun, and you aren't. He picked up the gun and aimed it at me. Suddenly, I remembered the dying red and the dagger he gave me. I pulled it out and aimed it at him. My dagger was dark, while his gun glowed a little, as usual. He laughed. You brought a knife to a gunfight? Should I shoot you now and enjoy your body as you die? Maybe I'll make your parents watch. Would you like that, little one? If anyone deserved to die, it was this creep. I just needed a plan to make it happen and not die first. I wasn't going down without a battle. His piggish eyes were on me for a moment, and I swear I saw him drool. I fought the urge to vomit. It might have been amusing to see his reaction, but I needed to stay dignified. I'll shoot you in the belly. It'll take you 20 or 30 minutes to die. That gives me lots of time. I focused on his finger as he pulled the trigger. Like a fool, I tensed up, but nothing happened. We both stared at his gun, confused. It was the first time I saw a messenger gun completely dark. Not now! Not when I could have so much fun! He complained. I glanced at my own weapon, which started to glow again. It shone brighter and brighter until even he noticed. The dazzling light filled the room. What the heck? He asked. You're a chosen one. That can't be. We haven't seen one in, I don't know. You shouldn't even have that. Hatred for this monster surged in me. I didn't choose to act. My legs and arms seemed to move on their own. It felt like the dagger was guiding me. I lifted my hand in a smooth motion, aiming for his neck. There was no resistance, just a thin red line on his neck that quickly widened. The dagger's glow dimmed to a soft shimmer as he pointed at me in shock. It was clear he didn't expect to be the one dying. Abigor, I said as he slowly collapsed. That was the first time I ever said his name. I could have said anything like, "Die, you monster," or "You deserved this," but talking to a dying man felt pointless. I just watched him bleed in silence. He was dead. I stood over him, alive and in control. I promised myself I would kill him, and I did. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt relief. Finally, something good had happened, but then I realized my problems had only just started. I stood in a forbidden messenger room, right in the middle of a royal messenger station. I was staring at the body of a messenger who had died. I had a lot of problems now and no idea what to do next. One thing was clear. My life as I knew it was over. I didn't know if that was a good thing or not. It didn't matter now. I might be in big trouble, but I needed to protect my parents somehow. If they found out I killed a messenger, the punishment would be terrible. Not just for me, but likely for my parents too. Even if I was the only one who got in trouble, my parents would still lose their safe life here. They didn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. They were just too weak to handle such trouble. That meant I couldn't tell them what happened. I would have to figure this out by myself. First, I had to think about how to hide the body. Then I had to plan how to leave this place. If I disappeared, maybe my father could handle things with my unfaithful mother on his own. More importantly, getting away was the best way to keep my parents safe. I decided to leave the messenger's body for my father to take care of. If no one found it and I was gone, they might be okay. It was a simple but clever plan. The messengers always wore masks. Well, except when they were in very bad situations, it seemed. I was tall for an 18-year-old girl, and the messenger had been shorter than most men. His clothes would fit me just fine. I took one last look around the station, thinking about my parents and my life. It felt like everything was fading away as a new life began for me. I washed the mask before trying it on. It had always looked scary, but up close it seemed cheap and ordinary. It was shiny metal tied to the head with simple string. The raven's beak did not look scary anymore, it just seemed silly. The boots, however, were nice and fit me well. I had plenty of time until morning, so I cleaned his clothes to get rid of the bad smell. I put them on and checked my reflection in the mirror. My long brown hair was hidden under the hood. I looked just like he did, which made me uncomfortable. Now all I had to do was not become like him. The only thing left to take was the gun. It lay there on the ground where he had dropped it, black and still, but still dangerous. It had always stood for great power, like something given by a god. It felt wrong to take or even touch it. But then again, maybe it had malfunctioned, which could mean it was useless, or the gun had decided not to kill me. In that case, the gun and the dagger had chosen who lived and who died. They seemed to act in sync with one another. I was starting to believe that these weapons had a will of their own. If they did, they seemed to want me to survive, at least for now. They definitely weren't helping the messenger, which was something to think about. With some hesitation, I reached for the gun. I half expected something bad to happen, but instead, the gun started to glow. The light pulsed gently, as if it welcomed me. I remembered what the red said about being a chosen one, and with effort, I picked up the large weapon. Like the dagger, it was surprisingly light. It was the first time I had a good look at a messenger gun. Its design was simple and beautiful, just a tube with a hole in the front, a grip, and a trigger. It was as basic as could be. Even though it must have been old, it looked brand new. The grip changed shape to fit my hand perfectly. I felt the dagger in my belt vibrating a bit. It was as if they were talking to each other, or maybe to me. I had heard of old guns that needed special bullets. Nothing about this looked like it needed them. Aside from the trigger, there were no buttons or switches. I already knew it made a whip-like sound when fired, and it didn't shoot actual bullets. It appeared that it fired energy, whatever that was. I put the gun in the messenger's holster on my leg. Now I felt much safer. I couldn't just leave without saying something to my parents, but a personal goodbye might be too hard for them. A letter seemed like the right idea. They could burn it and act like they didn't know anything when the investigation started. I quickly wrote that I was sorry for killing the messenger. I said I was sorry for leaving such a mess and that my leaving was the best choice. I advised them to say I was to blame for everything. I wished them well and told them to try to fix their marriage. Writing this felt strange, but I figured I would deal with my emotions later. This was the moment I formally left my childhood behind, and that made me sadder than leaving my weak parents. I loved them, despite their faults, and hoped to see them again one day. I went to the messenger's horse. Over the years, we had really grown close. It felt like my only true friend sometimes. With a heavy heart, I opened the gate, climbed on the horse, and left the station I had lived in my whole life. It should have felt like breaking free from a cage, but it didn't. Trying not to look back, I rode through the cool night air, savoring my freedom and feeling more in control of my life than ever before. I felt calm and ready for whatever was next. After walking for a few kilometers and as the sun rose, I looked back at the station. It stood alone in the empty land like a thorn. I had been outside many times, but not like this. I didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. It didn't feel like home. Instead, it looked like a strong fortress, made to keep me out. I realized I was now an outsider. I suddenly realized I didn't know how to act in the world outside. How were people supposed to treat a messenger? I didn't even know where I was going. I had a vague idea of where the next village was, but that was all I knew. I had no plan. The horse I rode, which I thought of as mine, didn't have these problems. It just knew where to go. I liked that idea, so I decided I could come up with a plan later if I needed to. Our first stop was a small, nameless village where we used to buy food. I recognized some of it, but I never liked being there. I'd always thought the station was poor, but the complete lack of resources here showed me how hard things really were. People in dirty clothes sat in the dirt. Some were lucky enough to have simple homes made from scraps. Many looked sick from eating bad food. Even I could tell which food was safe and which was not. Only the truly desperate ate the bad food, and the problems were clear all around me. In the past, people welcomed us because we brought money when we bought good food. The village looked the same, but the anger I felt coming from everyone changed how I saw it. Every person turned to stare at me. All talking stopped. Some had the courage to point at me. At that moment, no one was being violent, but the tension was thick, like a storm about to break. My horse stopped as a group of people closed in around us. It was eerily quiet. If this was what life as a messenger felt like, I didn't want it. Being hated by everyone would change a person. Even the kindest heart could turn cold. But I doubted Abigor was ever kind. Panic started to rise in my chest as the people surrounded me, looking at me like I was to blame for things I hadn't done. My hand moved to grip my gun. The weapon glinted in the bright sun, shining so brightly it seemed to blind everyone, even me. My calm horse seemed uneasy. The bright noon light turned blue, giving the whole scene an odd, dreamlike feel. The people were just as shocked as I was, and I was glad my mask hid my own fear. Clearly, they had never seen a high-tech item shine like this before. The blue light seemed to push the crowd away from me. Yes, this felt like power. I felt like a god among mere humans. I felt important, untouchable. And then I stopped. This was wrong. These were good people, and they had every reason to hate the messengers. I was on the wrong side of this and should not be enjoying this feeling of power. To stop this, I signaled my horse to move on. We had learned to understand each other with simple gestures. We both seemed relieved to leave the village unharmed. Luckily, Abigor had packed plenty of food and money. I silently thanked him for his generosity. I just needed to figure out what I was really aiming for. As I rode away from the village, I entered a completely new area. I felt excited until I realized that, after hours and even days of traveling, not much was changing. The desert gave way to very few plants, and some hills appeared in the distance. I spotted black birds from time to time. I had thought some parts of the kingdom looked much nicer than ours, but so far I was not impressed. The most important thing was that I didn't see a single person for days. The thrill of wandering was gone. Even though I had always been angry at my parents, I realized that I missed them deeply. I even missed that old station. I felt lonely and a bit homesick. While I sometimes felt unimportant, I also realized that I was finally doing something. I was not just waiting for things to happen. Besides, I was used to being alone and keeping my thoughts to myself. I had plenty of time to think as I let my horse follow its own path. We were probably going wherever messengers went when they weren't carrying messages or visiting someone. That was okay with me, as I had no better ideas. The horse seemed fine with it, too. I was probably lighter than Abigor, and I know I smelled better. Then there was this chosen one talk. Both Abigor, my enemy, and the weak Red, his enemy, said it. It seemed to have something to do with the weapons, which had glowed when the chosen one was mentioned. Chosen? By whom? For what? How did it fit with what I believed was right? One thing seemed clear. It meant the weapons wouldn't harm me or let me be harmed. That was a good thing. At least I wouldn't get hurt while I figured out a plan. My horse and I fell into a nice routine. I figured out how to get food and take care of my horse in small villages without causing any trouble. The less human I acted, the fewer issues I had. People just took my money, did what I asked, and never questioned anything. Showing kindness or care just brought problems. I wondered how this would change me if I had to do it for months or years, but I pushed the thought away for now. I realized I could never be like Abigor, but I didn't understand why. A few days later, I got the change I wanted, but it wasn't good. I saw a path starting to appear in the empty land. As time went on, the path became clearer, with trash piled up on both sides. Soon, I could see a town in the distance, much bigger than the little villages I had left behind. A few kilometers away from the town, I noticed a man-made pit. The awful smell made me want to look away, but my eyes went there anyway. It was full of bones and rotting bodies just thrown away carelessly. I stood there, shocked. My parents used to say the world was cruel and that we were lucky. I always nodded like I agreed, but I thought they were wrong. We were not lucky at all, not anymore. Now I saw the truth. The hunger and sickness I had seen in those small villages were nothing compared to this. I was heading toward a town where people didn't even bury their dead. With no other choice, I rode toward the town. All my earlier calm vanished. I started to pay close attention to my surroundings and notice things I hadn't seen before. Animal bones, broken machines, piles of trash. I expected to find traps at any moment, but none came. I used to think the station was plain and ugly until I reached those smaller villages. Now, stepping into this larger town made the station look like paradise. The smells were terrible and changed all the time. There was rotting food, waste, and burnt flesh, all mixed together in a dizzying way. The first person I saw was an older man with a wild white beard and dark skin. He had a jagged machete on his back while he pedaled a tricycle down the street. I looked around. There were other people, but nobody seemed surprised by the scene. A thin woman with a red-painted face and a skewer through her cheeks walked by. Next, I saw a half-starved man with a big belly dragging some junk behind him like a pet. No one seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. They all stared ahead with blank eyes. The little tricycle squeaked loudly. I wished it would break just to disturb this strange scene, but it kept going. Everyone had some kind of weapon, from big knives to machetes to long swords. These were not just for show, they were used every day as shown by the scars and missing limbs around me. This was a world of violence, and the strong ruled here. Before, only the messenger brought a hint of danger into my peaceful life, and I had disliked him for it. Now, I understood. This place needed some sort of force to keep the peace, but didn't have one. No one paid any attention to me, so it seemed clear they were used to messengers coming and going. Maybe they couldn't keep order, or maybe they just didn't care. I guessed it was the latter, as they showed no interest in me either. People weren't hostile, curious, or friendly. They were just focused on getting by. I shrugged and moved on. Even though folks hardly noticed me, they kept at least 5 meters away. I imagined that messengers had guns and shot anyone who got too close, and I wasn't far off. I heard some grunting to my left and realized no one was talking. It was as if people here had forgotten how to speak. Instead, their communication felt like an animal-like language. I turned toward the noise and was shocked, though my mask hid my surprise. The man making the noise was tall and thin. The sun had cooked his skin into a dark, leathery texture. Like everyone else, his face and body had thick white stripes painted on them. I didn't know if this meant something. He wore a thick steel ring around his neck that looked like a slave collar, but it could also be jewelry. His body was marked by deep scars from knife fights. Some cuts looked fresh and would never heal. He grunted again, hoping to attract me to the dirty bowl of muddy water he was selling. I recognized bad water, and this was the worst I had ever seen. Only desperate people would drink it, which meant most in this town did. I shook my head and moved on, unsure if I should feel sorry for him or be angry at his attempt to sell me poison for cash. Like everyone else, including me, he probably had little choice. After a while, I got used to the odd people around me, feeling somewhat safe since they stayed away. Even the small kids seemed to know this rule, and I didn't want to think about how it came to be. Everyone wore bits of metal or plastic, and the bigger the pieces, the better. I began to realize these were parts from high-tech machines or even older ones. It looked like they treated these pieces like sacred objects, trying to attach them to themselves. Maybe they hoped for some magic to come from them. The piercings and the gruesome skewer I had seen served a similar purpose. I knew humanity was struggling, but I didn't expect anything like this. My horse led the way until we reached what seemed to be stables and a rundown place to sleep. The whole situation was straightforward. My horse was taken care of quickly. I paid some money, was shown a decent room, and got a meal that I could eat. No one asked questions or said anything, and I was okay with that. The next day, I left the place where I stayed and walked back to a food market I had seen the day before, leading my horse along. The market was much too big for the small amount of food they had. The sellers tried hard to make their tables look less empty, but it didn't help. The lack of food didn't seem to matter since nobody was buying much. Many thin and hungry people stood around, some looking really weak. Their tired eyes watched the few buyers as they looked at the food. I finally spotted some decent food near a group of people who were watching me closely. They looked so desperate that I felt like prey being watched by hunters. I shook off the thought, bought what I needed, and hurried away. I wanted to leave this miserable place as soon as possible. If this was what the bigger towns looked like, the whole kingdom was in trouble. I had no idea if bigger cities were better and didn't want to find out. It seemed like more people meant more suffering. I set up camp after I had walked far enough from the town to feel safe. I found a nice spot that looked like others had used it many times before. Later, I realized that this choice might have been a big mistake. I had become used to having my weapons with me. It felt like I had company all the time. In quiet moments, like just before I slept, it was as if my weapons were helping me notice things around me. They seemed to work together, almost like they were one being, looking out for me. This being felt like it knew me, but I didn't understand it at all. It could be good or bad, or maybe it just didn't care about anything at all. My weapons had saved my life before, so I couldn't complain too much. Still, it was like traveling with an unknown and dangerous friend. I thought about this as I fell asleep. Suddenly, my dagger began to vibrate under my belt. I opened my eyes to find it was dark, and I had lost track of time. I looked around but only saw blackness. I listened closely, and apart from my horse's breathing and my own heartbeat, there was just silence. But I felt something was off. I sensed danger nearby. When I took hold of my gun, it was also vibrating. The usual blue glow my weapons had was gone, which was smart since it would have given away my position. Then, I heard soft sounds to my right, and I tried to hold my breath, scared that even the smallest noise would give me away. How could they find me in the dark? I thought it was because they knew this place well. I was foolish to camp in such a clear spot. Another soft noise came, this time closer and to my left. I didn't know what to do. If I was outnumbered, even my weapons might not save me. To my surprise, my left hand held my dagger and I didn't remember grabbing it. It suddenly lunged to the left and hit something soft. There was a groan and my knees felt weak. It didn't make sense until something swished past my head. My right hand, holding my gun, moved up without me thinking, and I pulled the trigger. The loud noise seemed too loud in the deep silence. I was in a life-or-death struggle. I was there, but it felt like I wasn't really part of it. I called my weapons mine, but I wondered who was controlling who. They used my senses and muscles however they wanted. My left hand wasn't needed for a moment, but my right kept aiming and pressed the trigger 6 more times. Even though I still couldn't see anything, I knew I hit my targets perfectly. I really wished to know what was happening when my weapons glowed, lighting up a terrible scene with their blue light. I had just killed 8 people. I stared at them, shocked, and immediately started to think of reasons why it was okay. They had tried to kill me. No one had forced them to do that. But looking at their half-starved faces, it was clear that something pushed them to act. Their choice was to either steal my food or starve. I could almost hear their thoughts. They knew it was risky, but they felt they had no choice. Success could mean life or a quick death, and anything seemed better than their misery. I looked closely at their faces. There was a couple with their teenage son. An old man had only one arm. Another man had a terrible infection on his face. It was hard to see if the other side of his face was hurt too because it was missing. None of us had a real choice. It wasn't a massacre, it was self-defense. I was still me, but I felt different. I felt tougher and less caring, and I didn't like that. I couldn't stay there, so I quickly packed my things and saddled my horse in the blue light from my weapons. I had a long journey ahead of me and many thoughts to sort out. I remembered the day Abigor shot the man who ran into the station. At least I now knew if the guns could shoot more than once. But my gun only let me fire once, just enough to hit the poor Red. I realized that single shot was meant to kill him. He died, and I got his dagger. It felt like such a waste. The way these weapons worked and how deadly they were made me feel scared. I was glad they were on my side, at least for now. I was just a tool, and that tool was me. I had turned from a caring person into a cold killer, and I hadn't even chosen that. I didn't like that idea, but being dead didn't sound good either. My life depended on these weapons. Without them, I wouldn't survive in this harsh world. I worried that if I wasn't already like Abigor, I would be soon. I needed to find a way to stop that. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then it happened again. Both guns shook slightly. My horse was calm, so whatever it was something it was used to. I looked around and finally saw a small black spot far away. I had nothing else to watch, so I kept looking at it. It seemed to be moving in the same direction we were going. Unfortunately, it looked like we were heading towards each other. That wasn't too bad. I had learned to handle meeting people. The real problem was that the person seemed just as dark as I was. Dark was not a good sign. Dark meant this was likely another messenger. I didn't know how messengers dealt with each other. This meant my cover might be blown. Running away was not an option because that would give me away right away. Oh well, I would think of something when it came time. If the weapons thought I should die, then I guess that was how it would go, no matter what I did. For a moment that could end in a fight, the scene was strangely calm. Just two people riding slowly through a deserted, empty land, not even looking at each other. Well, I was pretending not to look, trying to see him without moving my head. He just stared ahead, looking relaxed and sure of himself. "You seem tense, Abigor," he said in a high voice, breaking the silence that felt so long. Oh no, he hadn't even looked at me. Had he already figured out my disguise? I had heard there were many messengers around. How could he know I was pretending to be Abigor? I needed to reply somehow without speaking. My voice would give away my act. I turned to look at him closely for the first time. He looked just like I did when I looked in the mirror back at the station. I remembered that clearly, but it felt like it happened to someone else, like another life. Not knowing what else to do, I shrugged and looked away again, hoping he wouldn't ask me more questions. The tension was thick, and I was sure one of us would be dead soon. I was pretty sure it would be me. He was a much better fighter. I was no fighter at all. "Abigor," he said again, stronger this time, clearly wanting an answer. I turned my head once more and froze, staring into the end of his gun. I might not be the first person to pretend to be a messenger, I thought. He looked unfazed and had seen right through me. How could that be? Ordinary people hadn't even noticed. But that didn't matter right now. My death was what mattered, and the little details could wait. I hoped he would just take me in, but I wasn't feeling very hopeful. "Whoever you are, take off your mask. Now." I wouldn't be able to reach my gun before he shot me. After all I'd been through, was it ending like this? Tears of anger filled my eyes. This was so unfair, but I felt powerless. Now! I felt my hand move to my face, taking off the mask even though I didn't want to. Well, he had seen through my disguise, and the dumb mask was just causing me trouble anyway. I pulled off the mask and shook my hair loose for the first time in days. Interesting. A girl? What did you do to my brother? I might have only seconds left, but I felt relieved. Finding out he was Abigor's brother made sense of my blown cover. "Your brother was terrible," I said, surprising myself with my strong voice. He chuckled. "No doubt about that. Still, he was a messenger and my only brother. You saying means he's dead." Will you tell me how he died? Sure. He tried to hurt me, and I killed him. I cut his throat. I killed him like the animal he was. To my surprise, he just nodded calmly. Yes, that's the Abigor we all knew and hated. That's why he got the job to bother that station woman. Anyway, that's an interesting story, but I need more information. My brother was a bad guy, but he was also clever. I have scars to prove it. You're what, 18? I just nodded. Figured as much. I'm not sure an 18-year-old girl could just kill him, but that doesn't matter much. His actions always caused trouble. I guess it was the same this time. I can't say I'll miss him. You probably did everyone a favor, but I can't let this go. You killed a royal messenger. As the Queen's right-hand person, I hereby sentence you to death. It was nice talking to you. He pointed his gun at my head and pulled the trigger. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I still was. Instead of shooting, his weapon turned dark. Not my day to die, I guess. What the? He mumbled, trying to shoot again but getting the same result. Oh, I see, he said calmly as he put away his gun. I watched closely as he pulled back his hood. His head was almost bald, just like Abigor's. Then he surprised me by taking off his mask and saying, "My name is Eligos." He looked just as scary as Abigor had. I didn't know what to do next. Should I try shooting him and see if he would shoot back until one of us fell? He wanted to kill me without any feeling. Should I do the same? Wouldn't that make me just as bad as him? Just as bad as Abigor? It wouldn't be self-defense any longer. He was just sitting on his horse, watching me. Suddenly, he broke into my thoughts, reaching for his gun again and aiming it at me. My right hand moved faster than I expected. I pulled my gun and shot in one fast movement. It felt smooth and graceful, definitely not like me. His gun might not have worked, but mine did. All of this happened in just a moment. Eligos, now missing part of his head, fell off his horse into the dirt without a sound. Old me would have been shocked by the sight. New me should have been shocked. I just didn't feel much about it. It didn't bother me. My horse kept going down the road like nothing happened. Eligos's horse followed us, still calm and unbothered. For some reason, the normality of it all struck me. I could understand the need to kill or be killed. I didn't expect anyone to give a speech for me when my time came. Still, it felt wrong that this was so ordinary, even in such a cruel and harsh world. After a few minutes, I turned back. I dreaded seeing the mess that had been a person just moments ago, but I feared what would happen if someone found his gun more. A random person wouldn't know how to use it well, but could easily hurt someone with it or scare them. I couldn't let that happen. After I picked up Eligos's gun, I thought about his last move. I was sure he did it to make me shoot him. It felt like a kind of forced suicide, but I didn't know why. Maybe it was part of some code he had to follow. Maybe he didn't want to be caught by an 18-year-old girl. In the end, I realized I didn't care about him or his reasons. He was dead, and knowing why didn't change anything. I thought briefly about burying him, but I didn't have a shovel. I knew the guns wouldn't help with that, so I just turned and left, feeling more of my old self slipping away. I added Eligos's supplies and money to my stash. I didn't know if a messenger would ever carry 2 guns like an Old West hero, so I strapped Eligos's gun to my back and covered it with my cloak. Then, my 2 horses and I started walking down the road to wherever. What had I learned from meeting Eligos? First, I was wearing or carrying something that marked me as Abigor, at least to his brother. I didn't think it was the costume. Eligos's looked just like mine. Maybe it was the horse? But the 2 black horses looked the same to me. No clear answer here. I would think about it later. I had heard descriptions of the place for as long as I could remember. As a kid, I was amazed. Later, as a teenager, I knew they had to be exaggerations, except they weren't. As my parents told me, there were high black mountains reaching up like dark teeth. I accepted that as true and saw it confirmed. But it was also true that the palace was as big as the mountains and looked like them. That truth was hard to grasp. The outer shape was like a mountain, but it was made of a tangle of towers, bridges, and halls. It was clearly from a time before the war. Now, no one could build anything more than a simple hut. Once again, I felt sad for what the world must have been like back then. As I got closer, I expected to see a lot of guards and checkpoints. There were none. What I found was an almost empty, flat area. The palace looked so huge and mysterious, It made me feel like an intruder. It seemed to push me away with its size. The design was meant to scare ordinary people, and it certainly did. I forced myself to keep going. Actually, I didn't even need to. My horses moved on, unfazed, eager to get home. I guess that frightening look only scared humans. They didn't go to the large, closed main gate, but headed for a smaller side entrance leading to the stables. A few guards watched the little traffic lazily, but didn't stop me. I expected them to search me, but nothing happened. This was good, since my name probably didn't matter to them, and I had no plan. My horses plodded through the smaller but still impressive gate and stopped in the middle of a dusty hall. There was some activity, stable hands caring for horses, and to my shock, a few other messengers walking around. 2 stable hands came and took the horses away, never asking why a single messenger came with 2 horses. I was glad to see that the other messengers didn't talk and just walked casually out the other side. I didn't want to engage with them. I really didn't want to see what was ahead, but I knew I had to. This place had taken all the bravery I felt as a teenager and shattered it. I felt sure there was only one thing waiting for me: my death. The hall was huge. It didn't seem to end. It just faded into darkness. I quickly looked up, trying to keep a low profile. I couldn't see a ceiling either. The other messengers were headed toward a raised platform, so I followed them. Just going along with everyone else was what this journey felt like. I never felt like I had a choice, and this moment was no different. The platform turned out to be bigger and farther away than I thought. As I got closer, I saw it was round, about 1 meter high, and surrounded by bright, flickering torches. People were standing or moving around, but everything focused on a large black throne with a shining blue figure sitting on it. I had to admit I had never seen anything so impressive in my life. The whole scene made me feel tiny, like an insect in front of a god. I moved with the other messengers, feeling a bit safer in their company. I blended in and watched what was happening. I noticed they all kept some distance between each other, which worked for me. Maybe they were scared of getting sick. Finally, we mixed into the group of messengers around the throne. They stood still, dark and patient. Staying still and quiet was not my strongest skill, but I did my best, and my fear helped by freezing me in place. After a few minutes, a figure in black stepped down from the throne, walked down the stairs that wrapped around the platform, and joined the waiting messengers. After that, one of my fellow messengers went up to the blue figure, who I guessed was the Black Queen, even if her color seemed strange. Oh no, this was an audience. It was clear that the messengers needed to report to the Queen. I had nothing to say and felt like I wouldn't be able to speak. I already knew I would die here, but I wanted to delay it as long as I could. To me, the black figures all looked alike. They wore a beak mask and a hood, and they had shiny weapons on their legs. Strangely, they all seemed to know whose turn it was. How would I know when it was my turn? They would all turn and look at me, and I felt like a fraud standing among the most dangerous people in the kingdom, waiting for my true self to be revealed. One by one, I watched messengers step forward while I stood frozen with fear. It was only a matter of time. Despite my earlier boldness, I didn't want to die. What if I just ran away? It seemed useless, and most of all, pointless. Why did I come here only to run again? I wondered why I came to the palace at all. Did my horse lead me here? I hoped that was not the case. It would mean that a horse was smarter than I was. No, it must be fate or something important. It had to mean more than just going with the flow. But was there really another choice? I had killed a messenger. The whole kingdom was probably searching for me. Yes, that was it. I remembered. I was here to protect my weak parents from what I had done. I was sacrificing myself for them. No need to be afraid, I tried to tell myself. Everything was how it was meant to be. For some reason, the hall didn't seem as dark anymore. The light from the torches was colder now. I could see the floor, which looked impossibly smooth and shiny, yet it was covered with strange patterns. As it got brighter, I noticed the messengers around me started to look at me. Why me? I felt confused. I saw that the light came from my gun and dagger. I thought Eligos's gun on my back was glowing too, but my cloak covered it. I wished they would lose their light, but nothing happened. I never figured out how to make them do what I wanted. They seemed to act on their own, sometimes aligning with what I wanted. The messengers pulled out their guns and started to step away from me. My cover was blown, and the weapons that had saved me now meant my end. I didn't understand their reasons and probably never would. In the end, everyone in the kingdom seemed to be controlled by their own weapons, even the queen. If that were true, then none of them, not even her, had any real power over me. I held my head high as my confidence started to return. Slowly, I turned to look at her again. While she had been hard to see before, now my vision was clear. The group of black figures around us had moved apart. The hall lit up, and she was staring at me. Gradually, she lifted her hand and pointed at me. "Come here," she ordered. Her voice wasn't loud, but even from far away, it was strong and strangely familiar. I decided to go along with what she wanted. It seemed better than trying to fight my way to safety through all the armed messengers. When you have no choice, at least be brave, I reminded myself. As I neared the stairs, I saw a woman in a black suit under a dazzling blue halo. As I climbed the stairs, it felt like I was walking toward my end, because I was. Hundreds of messengers had their guns aimed at me. I found it strange that the woman on the throne had no guards around her. This showed she felt very safe in her power. She did not see any messengers or anyone in the kingdom as a real danger. This included me, a young girl from a tiny, unknown place. I knew I had no chance against her. The messengers putting their guns away confirmed this. A few assistants hurried away without looking like they were running. As I got closer, I saw two things. First, she was looking forward to this. I could see on her face that she wanted to hurt me, and she was excited about it. She had no doubts about what would happen. Second, her voice and her face looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. My thoughts were all jumbled right then. She pointed lazily to the ground a few steps in front of her huge, scary black throne, telling me to either stop or kneel. I chose to stop. In her lap, she held a strange-looking gun. It was not like the simple guns that messengers used. This one was small, detailed, beautiful, and dangerous. "Please take off your mask," the Black Queen said in a polite yet frightening way. I would have preferred a harsher tone, not this sweet talk aimed at someone about to die. My cover was already blown, so I took off Abigor's annoying mask. I shook my hair and felt much better. I wouldn't die as Abigor. I would face my end as myself. Oh, a girl. How surprising. "Did we have a female messenger?" she asked, looking at the empty spot where the assistants had been. As I watched her, I felt myself change. It was like my mind opened for the first time ever. We both knew I wouldn't leave this room alive, which made our conversation special. Every detail around me stood out. I saw her wrinkles, the little flaws in her clothes, and smelled the smoke from the torches behind her. My mind felt sharp and awake. I was even surprised that I wasn't scared. This was just how things were meant to be. "Tell me, dear, who are you?" I felt no need to answer, but kept my gaze steady. She didn't seem to mind. To her, I was like a riddle, a little piece of fun on a dull day. "Wait, don't tell me. You seem familiar. Come up here." Curious about her, I climbed the stairs to the platform around her throne. A real smile crossed her face. "Yes, I know who you are. You are my niece." "What?" I replied, sounding quite dumb. That was why she looked so familiar. She had the same look and voice as my mother. I studied her more closely and noticed the firmness in her face and eyes. I realized she was even more beautiful than my mother. "Are you disappointed? Disappointed in your parents for not telling you? Disappointed in me for not making your life easier?" She laughed cruelly. All her friendliness was gone. She still wanted to kill me, but wanted to play first. "You are my toy, and you always have been. Your parents are my toys, too. Your only purpose is to entertain me. I see you're wearing Abigor's gear." So there was something special about his costume. I wondered what it was. "He finally tried to have you, right? The old fool. He was getting weak anyway, soon to be replaced. I'm glad you defeated him. Otherwise, it would have been a shame for the family." "What?" "Yes, you are right. I owe you an explanation before I end your life." She smiled without joy. I did my best to keep my face calm. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she affected me. "Yes, I will. And maybe it's finally time to deal with your parents, too. I should have done it long ago. This whole game has been silly, don't you think?" "You don't know what I mean? Let me explain. My sister was always weak. She cared too much and was too soft to rule. When our father, the old king, got sick, I didn't wait for the mind to choose between me and her. I took my chance, and the mind didn't stop me. I claimed the royal suit and the royal gun when your grandfather was helpless. I didn't dare to kill my sister back then because I wasn't sure how the mind would react. What is the mind? What? Where have you been all your life? Ah, yes, in that tiny, unimportant place. The mind is the connected, blue-glowing thing. It's a pre-war artificial intelligence. You might call it high-tech. Its only job is to help and advise me. Anyway, your sister was not happy about how I took the throne and left the palace for a few years. She never fought back, which showed she couldn't handle ruling. A few years later, she visited, wanting to bring our family together again. And guess what? She had married while away. Back then, I was blind. I saw that man and decided I had to have him. I knew he felt the same way, but he was too weak to act on it. It was funny. I used my royal power and made a few threats to push him past his limits, and it worked perfectly. From that day on, his real feelings showed, and we started a very intense relationship. I made sure your mother knew about it right away. Watching her was entertaining. She was so lost and heartbroken. Once I revealed his true feelings, she didn't have a chance. After a few happy months, I told him he needed to make it official. He had to leave her and be with me. I knew that was what he wanted. It's what every man wants. But the fool let my useless sister talk him into staying with her. I tried everything. I fought and begged him to follow his heart, but nothing worked. If it weren't for her being pregnant, we could have been happy. In the end, things got really nasty. He even said he never loved me, that I had forced him to be with me, that they had made a plan to play along for a while and then escape. It was sad and insulting. I completely lost my love for him. I decided that death was too easy for him and my sister. I remembered an old, empty messenger station far away. I thought about Abigor, a new messenger who was strange and disgusting. It all came together so well. They would live there in their own lonely hell. She would have to spend time with Abigor whenever he came there. He would know and be helpless to stop it. It would slowly ruin their love. When their child, you, came along, they wouldn't be able to hide how weak and bad they were. They would lose your respect. It was perfect, and Abigor assured me it worked. I stood there thinking about my parents. They had tried so hard to protect me. I had misjudged them, following the queen's evil plans like a puppet. All this pain for a queen's lost love and hurt feelings. I had never felt proud to be their daughter until now. I'm sure it showed on my face, and it made the queen's wicked smile even worse. And you know what's the funniest part? There's nothing you can do about it. Should I send you back to the station and let my men have fun with you too? Should I let your parents see? So this is how you treat your niece? I asked, already knowing what she would say. She laughed sharply, sounding genuinely amused. Dear, you wouldn't ask that if you knew the things I've done. I really don't care. How about this? You don't care about this either? I said, pulling out my dagger and pointing it at her. I knew it was pointless against her armor and all the messengers, but I felt like I had to do something. Her laughter filled the room as I heard noise behind me. I turned and saw all the messengers had pulled out their guns and aimed them at me again. Oddly, none of their weapons glowed. They were all completely dark. Confused, some of them looked at their useless guns. My dagger, however, was shining brightly. You don't stand a chance against this armor, dear, nor do you against my gun pointed at you. This has been fun, but I'm done now. Goodbye. The last thing you'll hear is I've decided to have your parents killed. This has gone on too long. I heard a soft click and expected to be shot, but nothing happened. Confused, I stepped back and looked at my unharmed body. The queen stared at her suddenly dark gun, puzzled. Mine seems a bit brighter than yours, doesn't it? I said, raising my glowing weapon. Kill her! She shouted. I heard soft clicks again, but the dark gun still wouldn't fire. Finally, the queen lifted her gun once more, but it wouldn't work. I looked at the woman who had just tried to kill me. She had tortured my parents and threatened their lives. She was nothing but cruel. The world would be better without her. Someone had to stop her. Someone brave and smart. Slowly, I aimed for her head. The faint glow that had been around her head disappeared. The smirk vanished, and she realized she was in trouble. She looked at me one last time. To my surprise, there was sadness in her eyes. As you are, I once was, she said just before I shot her. As I am, you shall be, I finished silently. What did she mean? Had she ever been innocent like I had? It was hard to imagine, but maybe. In what way would I be like her? Would I be a queen, evil, dead, some mix of those? Would I even have a choice? Raising my chin, I decided one thing. I would rather die than become like her. I would not be like the lifeless body lying on the floor in front of me. That's where you're wrong, dear aunt, I said, as I faced the messengers. They were all on their knees, bowing their heads. Traitors, I thought, but maybe useful ones. I realized I could either rule or die. Like the weapons, I would need these men if I chose to lead. I took my time looking around. Now I owned all of this, and it owned me. I walked in expecting death, but I found a prison. The mind had picked me to take her place. My aunt had been evil. I didn't know if she always had been or if the ruling or the mind had changed her, but in the end, she was only evil. The mind had used me instead of her, meaning she wasn't the tool it wanted. It gave me hope that the mind wasn't bad, and my weapons made a soft sound, almost like they agreed with me. Still, I had already harmed 2 messengers, 8 villagers, and my own aunt. I was close to completing her last prophecy. I needed to be careful. My power came only from my weapons and the mind. If someone stronger appeared, I would be just as dead as my aunt, who was still on the floor beside me. The kingdom was not ruled by a person, but by a machine, and I was just its tool. I didn't feel good about that, but given how things were in the kingdom, it might be the best choice. I had some power on my own, and I promised to use it wisely. I swore I would be a better queen than my aunt. I would stay true to myself and the person my parents raised me to be. I would not look down on them or be ashamed of them again. In keeping that promise, I felt a strength that had nothing to do with my weapons or the mind. Use your powers for good. This was something my mother always told me during my happy childhood. What powers did I really have, and how could I use them for good? I thought again of that terrible town, where the people looked worn out and hungry. There was a lot of good I could do there. Maybe I could bring fairness to that town and help people treat each other nicely, a bit like those Wild West sheriffs. But first, they needed food, and I didn't think the mind would care about that. It didn't seem to think about such things at all, so how much power did I really have? I had only as much power as the mind was willing to give me. I would keep that power as long as I was useful to it. I wasn't sure if my kindness, my good heart, and my wish to do what was right were things it valued or even accepted. I was starting to lose those parts of myself under its control. I promised myself that I would do everything I could to keep the best of me alive, no matter what it could do. I knew that if I didn't, and if I became selfish and cruel, I would be lost anyway. I looked around the large hall at the waiting messengers and the helpers behind me. I was suddenly responsible for them all. For the hungry people in the small villages, for the sick families, for the dangerous people in the town, for my parents, and for a whole kingdom filled with dust and danger. Now came the really hard part, I thought. Oh boy. I looked around again, still unsure about everything happening. There were 2 kinds of people in this huge, dark hall. One group had clearly agreed that I would be their new queen. The other was me, a stranger suddenly thrown into this mess. I didn't know what it meant to be a real ruler. Being smart might not be important, or the world wouldn't be in such a state. Still, it seemed fair to expect a ruler to at least know the name of the kingdom. Maybe knowing a bit of its history and geography would be useful too. Any knowledge at all would be a good start. I didn't know any of that. Yet the people in front of me were still kneeling, waiting for me to say something. I felt like I couldn't just leave them there. I had to do something, anything, to get some time to think. No one should have to go from being a scared possible victim one minute to a ruler the next, and just be expected to know what to do. At least, that's how I felt, but no one had asked me. In the end, I decided to send them away without a word, just waving my hand to dismiss them, trying to look important and strong. I figured no one wanted me to be nice. The messengers stood up in sync, almost like they had practiced it before. Maybe I accidentally copied how my aunt had ended meetings like this. Speaking of my dead aunt, her body was still on the floor, surrounded by a terrible puddle of blood. I didn't know what to do with her. Dragging her outside and burying her might seem wrong. I had to think about what kind of reputation I wanted to have, and moving a body around wasn't going to help. The messengers wouldn't do anything about this, and I wasn't going to show that I didn't know how to handle a dead body in the hall. Maybe this kind of thing happened a lot. No one seemed shocked by what had happened. I wondered how my body would be dealt with when I was no longer useful, just like my aunt. I thought I remembered some kind of shadowy helpers around the old queen, but when I looked, they were gone. I wasn't sure if they were ever really there or just a figment of my imagination. The messengers moved towards the exit like a swarm of dark insects. The only person left was a servant who looked older than anyone I had ever seen. He stood so still I wondered if he was even alive. It would be awkward to talk to him, only to find out he was part of the hall's decoration. His wide eyes were looking at something behind me. Feeling silly, I turned around to check. I decided to look at my aunt's body. Trying not to focus on what was missing from her neck, I spotted her gun on the floor nearby, along with the blood. The gun looked smaller than I expected, but it was beautiful and more detailed than the messenger guns. It also looked completely still, and I wondered if it had stopped working when my aunt passed away. I picked it up, and it came to life right away. Its surface had a pretty design of swirling blue lines. It was so beautiful that I started to forget how uncomfortable everything else was around me. My daydream was broken by the servant clearing his throat. So he was alive after all, but his eyes didn't show it. I saw that the messengers were gone, leaving me with a possibly half-dead servant and a completely dead aunt. The whole thing felt strange. The hall was too big, and I was too small. I felt weak, unimportant, and alone. I remembered the blue cover my aunt had when she was alive. But now, when I looked at her, I only saw her flashy clothes. The only thing that looked a bit modern was her belt. Carefully, I touched the buckle. It opened right away and began to shine with a blue glow. I felt it wanted to be mine, and I wanted it too. I pulled it off her, trying not to touch her warm body or step in the puddle of blood. The belt brought me joy, just like the gun. It fit perfectly and wrapped me in a blue glow whenever I wished. I thought this glow might protect me, and I started to feel less afraid, even though I still didn't know who controlled it. Feeling more confident, I turned to the butler to ask what to do next, but then I realized I had no idea. His lifeless eyes stared at me for a long time. I was sure he knew I was pretending. I might have tricked the messengers, but not him. After a while, he simply nodded and turned away, expecting me to follow him. Without better ideas, I did, although I felt that starting my time as queen by following a half-dead butler didn't seem very royal. He took me through the back of the large hall. At one point, I felt completely lost, surrounded by endless blackness. It was like walking through a dark night with no moon. The world seemed to disappear, replaced by emptiness. I turned around and felt relief seeing the slightly lit throne platform behind me, like a light in the dark. As I followed the butler, I got a better look at what seemed to be my new home. I had grown up in the desert, so I didn't have high standards, but what I saw wasn't encouraging. After leaving the audience hall, there were dark hallways, followed by more dark hallways, and then more dark hallways. It felt like a maze. Everything was spotless but plain. There was some light, but it wasn't enough to cheer me up, and I had no idea where it was coming from. It seemed to come from the black walls, which quickly absorbed it again. I told myself I didn't choose to live here, so I didn't just have to question the designer's choices, but my own sanity too. No, I was a queen trapped in a prison, but at least it wasn't too bad. There were no other prisoners, which I liked. The butler didn't really count, since I still wasn't sure if he was actually alive. We finally reached a big room, almost as empty as the others. There were two things here: a bed, which was the first piece of furniture I had seen since the throne, and a few clothes on the floor in a corner. It looked like my bedroom, and since it wasn't crowded, I guessed it would be mine. The bed seemed helpful, turning a completely empty room into a slightly less empty one. There was no chair, no carpet, and no closet. There wasn't even a window. Who had designed this palace? Whoever it was must have missed important details. Sure, the outside of the palace looked grand. Not gorgeous, but big and impressive at least. Inside, it was just annoying. The audience hall was too large, the hallways were confusing, and this bedroom was silly. The clothes on the floor looked clean but were not folded. This was all that was left of my aunt's life, and it didn't impress me. Apart from the dead body in the audience hall and this messy pile, nothing else was left of her. I turned to the butler to ask where everything else was, but he was already gone. An empty, windowless room that looked like a jail cell. A bed, some clothes on the floor, a lifeless butler, dark hallways, a huge, scary audience hall, a few weapons controlled by something unknown. That was all that was left of my aunt's life. I might have done her a favor by ending her life. It felt like that was all the life waiting for me, too, until someone else came to take my place. I shivered at the thought, but I wasn't going to give up easily. Something controlled the weapons. This palace was not what it seemed. There were secrets to discover, and finding them was the only interesting thing in this mess. Plus, staying alive had to mean something, too. After checking the bed, I looked at the clothes since it was the only other thing to examine. I started to sort through them, wondering how strange it would be to wear the clothes of the woman I had just killed, when I felt something move behind me. I jumped and turned around to see the butler standing there with a tray of food. I quickly realized there would be no privacy in my life anymore. He could move quietly, and my room didn't even have a door. How lovely. The food on the tray didn't look great. It was just a metal tray with 3 different colored pastes on it. It also had a cup of water and a spoon. Even before becoming a queen, I wouldn't have thought this was fancy. For the first time in a long while, I thought about being hungry. My stomach said it was time to eat. I quickly finished the food while sitting on the bed because eating on the floor felt too low for a queen. The pastes tasted strange, and none were like anything I had tried before. But they were tasty, surprising me, and I finished them all quickly. I woke up suddenly, realizing I must have fallen asleep after eating. The tray was gone, and I was alone. The light was the same, and I understood it would be hard to tell day from night in this place. I hoped that wouldn't make me feel strange over time. Yet, if someone wanted to lose their mind, this palace was the perfect place to do it. I thought about just giving up and going back to the station. I missed my old room where I could hide under my blankets and pretend none of this ever happened. But that thought didn't last. Someone powerful wanted me here, and without them I felt like I would be in danger. Besides, I never liked giving up, and I didn't want my old life back. The first thing on my list was to explore the palace. It was the only thing I could think of. This building had a purpose, but it wasn't built for comfort or ease for someone like me. I needed to learn about it and find its secrets. Okay, time to look around. Luckily, I found a sink in a corner and a simple hole in the floor. It was clear what it was for, and it looked very basic, like an afterthought. It was not how anyone would design a fancy bathroom. All the doorways were wide and tall, but there were no doors at all. Whoever built this place didn't seem to care about privacy. I noticed something else quickly. The hallways were very long but led to only a few rooms. There had to be more hidden places that I couldn't get to. There were no stairs, just one big spiral ramp connecting the levels. Maybe the building was left unfinished because of a war, and my ancestors started using it before it was ready. That could also explain why the bathrooms were so simple. The spiral ramp felt a bit scary. It circled around a dark, empty space without any railings. I carefully moved toward the edge. It was just endless blackness both ways. It was frightening, and I imagined what it would be like to fall for a long time. I stepped back, sticking close to the wall. The ramp was wide enough so I felt safe as I started to go down. After going one level down, I noticed my first problem. This level looked just like the last one. Worried about getting lost, I went back up and marked my bedroom level with some dirt I found in my pocket. After checking a third identical level, I decided to go directly to the bottom. The way down took forever because the spiral was so wide. I had to walk a long way for each level. It felt like the building was telling me to stay away, but I was strong and wouldn't back down. After each long turn, I found yet another identical level. Just when I thought it would never end, I finally reached the bottom. The lowest level was just as disappointing as the others. All that walking had led to nothing. I even checked the room across from mine, and it was the same, except it didn't have a toilet, a bed, or some old clothes. What was this place? Why did it have so many identical levels when they all seemed useless? Was this really all there was? Empty space and no answers? I felt hopeless. Would I be stuck in this palace forever without knowing anything? I noticed one of the worst things about the palace was how quiet it was. I used to enjoy silence, but this felt heavy. I began to fear I might never hear anyone speak again. Feeling upset, I turned to go back to my room. Suddenly, I jumped back and screamed in a very unqueenly way. The butler was standing there like a statue and didn't react to my shock. He just nodded, turned around, and began to leave the room. I guessed I was expected to follow him. This was frustrating. I was the queen, but my power relied on weapons controlled by someone I didn't even know. Also, the day-to-day ruling seemed to be done by messengers I didn't control either. I had accepted all of this, but having to follow my butler whenever he decided felt like too much. The man didn't even check if I was coming. I just followed him like a puppy, and he knew I would. When we reached the spiral ramp, I saw a round platform at the bottom of the shaft. I was pretty sure I would have noticed it earlier. It was hard to miss with its bright blue rim. The butler stepped onto the platform, and I followed him. Suddenly, it shot up through the levels I had just walked for hours. Great. We had an elevator, but it was just a floating disc connected to nothing. I had read about things like this before, but had never seen one. I felt silly for not using it because I didn't even know it was there or how to use it. I looked at the butler hoping for answers, but his blank stare was as empty as ever. "How does it work?" I finally asked. He just stared off into space until he glanced back at the same empty spot. This made me angry, but when we got to my room, I found food waiting for me on my bed. I ate it quickly, not realizing how hungry I was. I must have been exploring for hours, but I really had no idea how long it had been. Feeling full, tired, and alone again, I thought about my strange situation. I tried to understand everything, but there was nothing new to find. I still had two choices: go crazy or figure out what was going on. I chose to try the second option, even if it was hard, since going crazy felt much worse. The elevator shaft was dark, like a huge hole with nothing inside. It took a lot of effort to get to the edge of that black space again, and it was frustrating. Even my butler knew how to work this thing. I could control my weapons just by thinking about them, so maybe I could think about the elevator too. Suddenly, the large disc appeared out of nowhere and almost hit me. I stepped on it carefully and asked it to take me to the top level. It moved fast, covering the distance surprisingly quickly. I expected to see the same place as before, but I was wrong. The lower level where I lived felt dull and empty. Everything seemed built for a purpose, but it looked like that purpose was never used. The top level felt alive, with smaller hallways and a cool blue glow. My weapons and armor started to shine brightly on their own, as if they belonged here. The hallways were curved, and their walls were decorated with beautiful designs, just like my pistol. I chose one hallway randomly and walked down it. It led me to a large room, but I didn't notice much at first because my eyes were drawn to something strange. Behind a blue veil was a large blue ball floating in the air. I had seen balls before, but nothing like this. It was big and seemed to float there effortlessly. The thought crossed my mind that blue seemed to be a popular color here. The ball looked nice, but it was also impossible. I couldn't tell how big it was since there was nothing to compare it to, but it sure looked bigger than me. Without thinking, I walked closer until I hit the blue barrier, which stopped me. My body was held back, but my mind felt like it was reaching toward the ball. It was strange. I wasn't scared. It was a feeling like my mind was being pulled away from my body. It felt promising yet frightening, as if great knowledge awaited without using any words. Then, thinking clearly, I ran away, almost screaming. I was relieved my mind followed my body and didn't stay behind that blue barrier. The elevator was there to bring me down quickly. I landed ungracefully as it descended fast. I couldn't remember commanding it, but at that moment I didn't care. I had grown used to being in my body, and if avoiding that blue ball was the price, so be it. I promised myself to stay away from that level and find another way to understand this strange place. Luckily, I usually managed to control my curiosity well. After what felt like a long time, I was back in that blue room, staring at the sphere. I decided to keep a safe distance from the barrier. This room seemed to be the only part of the palace that was active. It had to mean something, but I didn't know what. The sphere had tried to pull my mind away before, but it felt friendly. Maybe it wasn't bad after all. Its surface was captivating. Strings of shining blue and white moved in complicated ways. Since this looked similar to what my pistol showed, I guessed the sphere controlled my weapons and my life. This was what I had been thinking of as the mind. It had probably saved me many times. Being afraid of it didn't make sense. Did that mean I should let it take over my mind? Probably not, since that didn't feel right. But what was my life worth without the knowledge it offered? Living here alone with a quiet butler wasn't much of a life. Without understanding and this sphere's help, I would either waste away in this place or die somewhere far away. Since I was at its mercy anyway, I decided to face it and see what happened. Before I moved toward the barrier, I felt a pull in my mind. It wasn't about distance. It was about willingness. That thought made me feel calm as my mind slowly drifted toward the mind. Suddenly, I was lying on a soft floor. The air around me was comfortably warm, not too hot like the desert, nor cold and empty like the palace. I looked around and saw I was resting on grass. It was soft and green, unlike the dry bits of grass struggling to live in the endless hot sand. I sat up to look around, and then I saw something surprising. There was clear water flowing nearby like it just kept spilling over from somewhere. I knew rivers used to exist, and seeing this one amazed me. It looked so clean, so beautiful. As I kept observing, I noticed my own feet. I almost jumped back, but I was sitting down. I expected to see 5 toes on each foot like I was used to, but instead, there were only 4 toes. They were long and thin, almost like fingers, which felt strange. The feet seemed bigger than mine, too. I realized I felt much taller than I used to be. I couldn't see my face, but my hands looked familiar, even if they seemed large. The same went for the rest of me, including a piece of brownish hair that fell in front of my eyes. It felt like I had become a little different, but still mostly the same. In the back of my mind, I understood that none of this was real, but it didn't matter. It felt just as real as life, but nicer. Everything was peaceful and calm, like a world should be, unlike my own world, which sometimes felt so harsh. I noticed a tall, slender bridge crossing the river, some mountains in the distance, and maybe a city. It was all too much. It was too perfect, too beautiful. I felt tricked and worried about getting too caught up in it. I needed to leave whatever this place was. In an instant, I was back on a hard floor. Things were real again, if I could call the hovering blue sphere real. It felt like my own brand of madness, and I was glad to be back. I even welcomed my loneliness and sadness, as they were real feelings. I hoped they were real and not just another dream. Confused, I returned to my room to think things over without reaching any clear answers. I tried hard to stay away from that dream world. I tried to accept the dark, empty hallways that felt lifeless. I told myself that even though reality was tough, it was still what I wanted because it was real. I convinced myself that I could handle reality no matter how grim it felt, and, well, I wanted the dream world again. So I stopped pretending otherwise. After dealing with nothing but fear, boredom, and a strange butler for what felt like a few days, I finally went back to the blue sphere room. I stood in front of the barrier feeling foolish, trying to remember how I entered the dream world before. There was no button or special spot, nothing that looked like a doorway. As I gave up and returned to my dull room, I wished to be in that other world. Suddenly, I was back on that grass again, taller than I should have been, feeling just as confused. I looked around and sighed. Wow, this place is beautiful. Too bad it's not real. Are you sure? A male voice asked suddenly, making me jump. Wow, my new body was fast. That jump felt impressive. Standing beside me was a young man. He didn't look like anyone I knew, but was kind of similar. Like me, he was tall, but his features were slightly different. He looked really good, with long limbs, a tall body, chiseled features, and muscles. He looked like someone I might dream about if I could design my perfect man. Wow, you look unreal, but you're really well made, I said. He chuckled softly. There's no real reality. It's just how your brain understands what your body senses. What you see comes directly from your brain, without any delay. Okay, but what my body senses is based on reality. So is this. It's just not based on your own body. What you see is real, just not in this moment and place. That threw me off for a bit. To keep myself busy, I looked over his impressive body again. Not only was he attractive, but he also looked very healthy, as if he'd never been hurt or gone without food. I glanced at my own body and honestly, I looked pretty good as well. I felt strong and healthy. "Come on, let's explore this world," he said, pointing to the bridge and the city ahead. Before I could even agree, he dashed down the hill at a mind-blowing speed. Caught up in excitement, I followed. My new body felt amazing. I had never liked running, but with this body, I felt like I could run forever. I moved forward in long strides, the wind on my face, chasing after an incredibly handsome guy like it was the most normal thing to do. "You need to go, now!" the guy suddenly shouted. Instead of running, I found myself back lying on the floor of the blue room once more. Wow, that was really rude, I thought. I sighed and got up. I almost thought I saw movement to my left, in one of the hallways leading to the lift. I knew it wasn't the butler. He was annoying, but he didn't make me feel this kind of fear. I felt something bad was coming for me, and my gut told me it was something very evil. I hated feeling this way, but I started to shake and froze in place. No, I need to do something, I thought. Don't just stand here like an easy target. I forced myself to look into the hallway where I felt that evil presence. I realized I'd be trapped if something was hiding in there. All paths led to the elevator where I would meet whatever was coming for me anyway. No, I had to be smart and quick. I would run, but not yet. I glanced at the hovering sphere, hoping it would help, but it just floated there, acting like it wasn't involved. I tried to get my suit to activate, only to find it was already ready. I only had my pistol and dagger with me. I had left the larger gun in my room. For some reason, the pistol felt more dangerous anyway, although the bigger gun was just as good. My heart raced as I forced myself to stay still and wait for the right moment. I watched all the hallways, focusing mostly on the one where I sensed danger. Finally, I noticed the color of the corridor change a bit. The blue looked less bright and more gray. Oddly, I felt relieved that I hadn't just imagined it. Slowly, with a sense of purpose, something big and black appeared. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then it took shape, and I wished it hadn't. It was a figure that looked somewhat human. It was shiny black and sleek. I knew it was a weapon, though I couldn't tell if it was alive or a machine. Its arms were too long and its body was too compact. It had a small, strange shape on the top of its torso. It stopped at the end of the hallway, a silent threat looking down at me even though I was standing. It looked like it smiled, even though I couldn't see its face. I just knew it was meant to scare me. Just its shape was already terrifying. We both knew I would try to reach the lift, wanting to be alone. All hallways led to it. If I picked one, it would probably catch me there. So I decided to take a chance and ran toward the middle hallway. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure turn into the left hallway, where it had come from. Once I was halfway there, I turned back to the sphere room and went into the second corridor on the right. It would soon realize it had been tricked and come back for me. I hoped it wouldn't come through this hallway. I counted to 10 and sprinted toward the lift. Just as I hoped, the threat wasn't there, but it was probably on its way back to the sphere room. Quickly, I ordered the lift to go down, relieved when it obeyed. After a few moments, I saw the black figure peek over the edge. Oh no. As I feared, it pressed the elevator button and ordered it back up. Oh no, I was about to be delivered to it. I fought to get the lift to go down again, both of us trying to control it in a frantic moment. Finally, the lift decided to go down smoothly. I had a ridiculous thought about a floating blue sphere arguing with the elevator to keep me away from a dangerous monster. How did my life get so messed up? I wished I could shout that I was just an innocent girl who stumbled into this mess and begged to be ignored. I felt like there was a fight happening and I was the prize. I tried to calm myself, but what was that black thing? I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't take a genius to figure out the blue thing seemed friendly to me. It was clear that the black thing was not. It seemed very hostile. If the mind and the blue things were my friends, then this black thing was definitely my enemy, which made me wonder if it was also an enemy of the mind. If they were enemies, what was taking place in the blue room right now? What would happen to me if the black thing defeated the mind? I would be in big trouble, that's what. The small thrill of having tricked the black thing and escaped didn't last long. With a sigh, I told the lift to go back up. It didn't seem very eager, but it complied. I felt small and powerless. How was I supposed to help in a fight between such powerful entities? I didn't think I could, but I had to try anyway. It felt hopeless, but that was normal. Shaking with fear, I felt the lift stop at the top. I wasn't looking forward to this at all. I assumed I'd be dead soon. The suit seemed fine, but that black figure was something else. The thought of fighting it, using my weapons, didn't even come to mind. It didn't seem worried about my gear, it just wanted to attack. But I had to face this, and I wouldn't back down now. I briefly wondered how my aunt had survived in this nightmare for so long, if they would find someone else to take my place, and why I was thinking such things now. I just hoped my life wouldn't flash before my eyes when I died. I didn't want to relive all that pain. What I saw in the blue room was simple, honest work. The black figure had a long, curved claw at the end of its left arm instead of a hand. The creature kept trying to cut through the blue wall that blocked the sphere from the rest of the room. It seemed to be having some effect, or it wouldn't keep attacking. I knew if it broke through, the mind would be in danger, just like me. That was not a good situation, so that was the bad news. The good news was, well, there wasn't much. I looked over my suit. It still sparkled over my body. The blue barrier looked a lot like my suit, but was much thicker. If the dark creature was busy trying to get through the barrier, my thin suit wouldn't help me at all. My small pistol seemed useless next to such a big threat. But this was all crazy, and it was my only choice. I took aim and fired my little gun. I had forgotten how powerful these weapons could be. The big guns were very deadly, as many villagers would say if they were still alive. This small pistol was even worse. The air exploded with a loud crack, and I thought I saw a glow between my gun and the creature's body. There was no kickback, but it felt like the room was filled with ripples. I definitely liked being on this side of the creature. I hoped the black thing would at least show some reaction, like roaring or flying backward. Instead, it stopped slashing, which was something at least. My shot was like swatting away a fly. I felt the creature turn towards me, even though I couldn't see any eyes. Then, I saw part of its body starting to glow. My shot had done something, but it seemed less impressed than I felt. So I fired again, and again. The air was filled with sharp cracks as I kept shooting, but the creature moved closer to me. It seemed unhappy that I was fighting back and slowly turned to walk away, letting my shots hit its back. For a moment, I hesitated, wanting to escape to my room, but I didn't want to ride an elevator with a scary machine. I glanced at the blue sphere, expecting some gratitude for saving it, but got nothing. Maybe the sphere had saved me by giving me this little pistol. My mind felt foggy. After a while, I quietly called for the elevator. I wasn't disappointed to see it was empty, and rode it back to my room, keeping my suit activated and my pistol ready. As I moved, I noticed the many levels I passed. The dark creature could hide anywhere, and there might be others like it. I wouldn't find them all, and I definitely didn't want to try. No wonder my aunt had gone mad here. I jolted awake, confused and scared. Something was happening, but I didn't know what. My suit had turned on by itself, which was not a good sign, and my pistol was glowing. In this place, it meant something bad was going on. A clear sign was the butler lying in the corner, in 2 pieces. I could tell that seeing a butler cut in half was not a good thing. I looked around for dark, frightening creatures, urging my weapons to glow brighter, but I didn't see any. I wished again for some privacy. Doors would be nice. It seemed like a simple idea, yet whoever built this place had not thought of it. I really wished I had a door right then, a closed one that would keep out monsters. Just then, a black wall slid out from the side, closing the entrance silently. Seriously? I could have had a door all along, and all I had to do was think about it. I was still new to living in this strange place. Just when I started to feel safe, my newly created door opened again. The butler walked in and picked up the top half of his own body as if that was normal. Clearly there was more than one butler here. At least I now knew there was one whole butler and 2 halves. There was no blood, so maybe they could put the broken one back together. It felt impossible to sleep in an open room where monsters had attacked butlers. Still, that's exactly what I did. I woke up feeling as fresh and relaxed as I could since I arrived, which was not very much. At least I had gotten some sleep and could function more or less. Functioning seemed good, but little did I know that was not what was needed. I could stay in my empty room and do nothing until I went as crazy as my late aunt. That didn't sound appealing. I could explore my surroundings, which would at least give me something to do. but it might also get me killed. I decided to avoid the upper level and stay away from places that could be filled with monsters. I made my way to the main hall, but it was still dark and empty. Sitting all alone on a throne seemed silly, and there wasn't even a half-butler around. I checked the stables, hoping to see someone, anyone, to feel connected to the real world. But the messengers were gone, and the stables were completely empty. Not even my stolen horses were there, and none of the stable workers could be found. The place looked clean and empty. The only good thing was the entrance I had used ages ago. It was still open, and real light flooded in through it. I ran toward it and took in the fresh air and bright light eagerly. Dirt, heat, bright light, and a barren landscape. Everything I disliked was out there, and it felt amazing. I could just step into the real world, walk away, and leave all the trouble behind. No more dark, lifeless hallways. No monsters trying to hurt me for reasons I didn't understand. No fake happy places in my mind. I could have my freedom again, even if it meant facing a barren desert, no horse, no water, and nowhere to go. I knew that running away wouldn't fix the dying world or stop the monster behind me. I was sure it was just me standing in the way of it and the rest of the world. It was really bad if I was the last hope of the world, but that's how it looked. Great. With a sigh, I turned back into the tomb I called home to continue my lonely life in isolation. I figured rulers often became distant from real life, but this felt extreme. I woke up feeling just as tired as always, once again unsure of what to do with my day and life ahead. Exploring was my only choice, even though I dreaded it. It was bad enough I could be hunted by the creature here, but searching for it felt crazy. Since craziness was my only constant, I sighed and went for it. The lower levels were mostly like this one, except for the main hall, and totally boring. I didn't feel up to exploring the upper level, so I chose to check out something in the middle instead. My new adventure started with a struggle. It was me against the elevator. Calling for it was easy. It showed up quietly and quickly from wherever elevators go when not in use. I jumped on, hoping it would take me to a middle level. The elevator went up, but then stopped suddenly. Great, I even broke fancy elevators, I thought. I tried to say my wish again in my mind, and the elevator responded with a bit of annoyance. I was way past wondering how an elevator could hear my thoughts. As I kept insisting, the elevator moved again, although slowly, as if it didn't want to. Great. Just when I thought my life couldn't get weirder, I started arguing with an elevator. The happiness of winning my first argument with an elevator didn't last long. The level we stopped at felt unwelcoming. I was used to the low light in the palace, but this place was darker and the air felt colder. Still, it was pretty interesting. The layout was different from any I had seen. Maybe here I could find some clues about, well, anything. Knowing what I was looking for would have been a good start, but I couldn't have everything, could I? In front of me was a long, curved room. One side had a long row of seats facing a wall. They were the first pieces of furniture that looked like they belonged here. The seats looked comfy and so perfect, they seemed like they had never been used. That was strange in a world filled with worn-out or broken things. Even stranger was that they looked too big. They seemed made for a person who was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. I didn't know much about our high-tech ancestors, but I was shocked by how tall they were. Maybe they had 4 toes on each foot, too. Each seat was surrounded by controls in a horseshoe shape. I had already learned something on this trip. The palace, or at least this room, was made to control or watch something. When I thought about it, it made sense. In a world that could build such a palace, all things were probably connected. The whole kingdom must have worked like a smooth machine. Being a queen would be very different, with information at your fingertips and choices to make. Now, with the kingdom in ruins, it was just a dark room. The deep sense of danger was strong, like warning bells ringing in my mind. The smart thing would be to leave and head to safer levels. I decided to do that, after quickly checking the first seat. My curiosity had nothing to do with it. I was just looking for useful information. As long as I stayed away from the urge to sit in one of the seats, I should be fine. Those seats could be traps. The seat felt like stone, but it was really comfortable against my back. It was just way too big for me. Maybe it was simply a design mistake, I thought. Someone must have ordered them way too big. I looked at the flat black surfaces in front of me and wondered who would look at them and what they would show. I wished I could see what they were meant to display. If I had been standing, I would have fallen over. Sitting down, I just jumped a little in shock. The flat surface right in front of me began to glow and show strange symbols. They looked like letters, but not like any I had ever seen. I wished to see something else, something I could understand, and the surface immediately showed me a moving picture of the desert outside the palace. Suddenly, the edge of the picture glowed red, and the images changed to reveal a floor plan. It was a curved room with seats facing a wall, just like the one I was in. The picture showed a glowing blue dot at my current position and a pulsing red dot moving toward the blue one from the right. Remembering where I was, I looked to the right. The feeling of fear came back, stronger than before. I slid down from the chair, trying to hide behind it. Looking around the corner, I saw a big, dark shape moving in the shadows. I checked my weapons, but they were completely dark. No, not now, I thought, just like the messenger who was about to die and his brother had. It felt like my weapons had betrayed me, and even my suit did not glow anymore. This must be how my aunt felt right before I had to fight her. She also tried to use her weapons, even though they had stopped working. I decided to do the same because I didn't have a better idea. I jumped out from my hiding spot, ready to put up a fight, and shot my small pistol. But instead of the silence I expected, I heard a loud crack and saw a bright glow on a dark, menacing machine. Suddenly my suit lit up again, and I found my dagger in my left hand. I was confused but thankful that my weapons were taking control, since fighting was not my strength. My pistol fired again and again, but the huge creature just kept moving toward me, gliding and walking oddly. I wondered if I should be worried about running out of bullets, but I didn't have time for that. I had nowhere to escape, except for the big chair. My pistol kept firing, hitting the creature's chest as I saw it lift its clawed hand. I knew instinctively that it was a deadly weapon, even if I wore some kind of protective suit. I leaned against the chair, making my upper body an easy target. A claw swung down, ready to split me in half. Just before it struck, I decided not to get in its way. As I moved back without meaning to, I admired how gracefully its long arm cut through the air, hitting the chair instead of me. The chair looked much worse now, like the rest of the world. The creature made a strange sound that seemed to echo in my mind. It felt like it was talking to me, but that didn't matter right now. I needed to focus because something was trying to kill me. This creature clearly knew how to fight. To my surprise, I realized I could fight too, at least when whatever blue energy took over me. I felt mixed about this, but didn't let it stop my right hand from aiming for the creature's head. I would have aimed for its neck if it had one. As the creature tried to free its claw from the chair, I barely noticed its left arm swinging low. It almost hit my knees, but I jumped up faster than I ever had before. I was caught watching two strange beings fight, and one of them was me. At least my view was good. Just as I landed, I shocked myself by jumping forward toward the creature. It felt like a bad idea, but my body didn't care what I thought. The creature still couldn't free its right claw, and had already used its left arm to attack. I ended up right in front of it just as its left arm finished its swing. Not having eyes didn't stop the creature from sensing me. I could tell it was surprised as I pushed my blade deep into its left shoulder with a force I couldn't control. It felt powerful because it wasn't really me doing it. I still felt like the same girl I had been when I left the messenger station. Somehow I was able to pierce the armor it wore. It howled in my mind, which was not a nice feeling. It seemed to express disappointment in what I had done, not pain. Once again, my body jumped back without asking me. Just in time, I avoided the left arm swinging back to hit my knees. Even while I jumped, my right hand kept firing at the same spot on the creature's head with strange accuracy. Just as I landed, its surprising offered a temporary ceasefire. This level was its territory, and if I stayed out of it, it would not come down to where I lived. Those moving wall pictures had given me a lot of information, but the idea of not having to deal with killer machines was very tempting. I agreed and turned away, stopping myself from looking back or running like the scared girl I felt like. The elevator hummed gently, welcoming me back. It was connected to my mind and showed it was happy to see me. I thought about whether it could feel emotions, but shook the idea off. It was just an elevator. Next, my shoe wouldn't start saying it felt sad or something. No, I was a human, and I knew what I wanted. I was the queen. Taking charge, I ordered the elevator to go down to my room. It obeyed quickly, making my knees wobble as it shot down. The elevator dropped me off on the top level, which I called the blue level by then. I walked to the blue room feeling like I was about to face my father and tell him what I had done wrong. I peeked inside the blue room carefully. To my surprise, there were no dark machines. The blue sphere was spinning, as it always did, and its surface moved so much that I couldn't tell if it was still or not. For some reason, I looked at the spot on the blue wall where the thing had messed with it before I made it stop. I thought the wall was just energy until I saw scratch marks on it. It looked like a mix of solid stuff and energy. Yes, it would break if the solid part was gone, the blue sphere told me, speaking straight to my mind, just like others did. Touching the other side of the room would kill me instantly, it said. I need the protective wall to stay alive. Why does it want to kill you? What is this thing? Who are you? I asked. I'm not sure if you're ready for all the answers yet. I am what you call the mind. I control the palace, the weapons, and a few other things like the helpers, it replied. Okay, but why did you pick me? What do you want? What I want is simple. I want to live. I chose you for that reason. I also chose your aunt. But she lost her mind and woke up the Dark One, which was hiding here. I didn't even know it was still here. There was more than one? Yes, there were 5. They started the Great War that ruined the world. I thought they were all gone, but one was still here. Your aunt became more unstable. I get it. This place isn't safe for humans. She found the Dark One by chance and decided to wake it up. The Dark One tried to make her join it, and I did my best to stop it. She was getting more unstable and close to siding with it when I noticed you. You are special, a telepath, if you want to call it that. There are very few left. This ability can be passed down, but most were killed in the war or after it. I was surprised you had this power because your parents didn't. That's probably why your aunt didn't try to hurt you earlier. I need a queen to manage the messengers who watch over things in my name. I want to rebuild a stable world, but I need a partner. The messengers or other people must never see me. They wouldn't understand and might try to destroy me. With a stable human partner like you, I can help rebuild what was lost. Right now, I can only try to stop things from falling apart completely. Neither Abigor nor your aunt were good enough partners, so finding you solved several issues. But we still have a problem with a crazy killing machine trying to hurt me. It's not just you. You aren't the target. You're just blocking it from getting to me. Unfortunately, it is not crazy. It was made to kill, and it does that very well. Okay, so it wants to kill you too. How is that possible? You're not alive. You're a machine. I am just as alive as you are. We're both machines that hold our minds. You are a biological machine, and I was built. That's the only real difference. I think and feel just like you do. But I didn't know how to finish my sentence. Surely there had to be a difference between us. I'm created by God. I could tell that argument sounded weak. No, you are your parents' creation. I was frustrated. There had to be something that made me different from this thinking machine. Okay, I have an immortal soul, I said, trying to convince myself. You hope you have one, just as I do. One day I will be turned off, and I hope that isn't the end for me. Wow. Just relax for now. Let's meet in a nicer place, he said. Suddenly we were standing on soft grass. There was no doubt anymore. This handsome figure was the blue sphere. I should have been shocked that it was using a body, but I was curious instead. So who are you? Who made you and why? I asked. Do you really need to know that? Isn't it enough that I exist and I'm here with you? Not really. I appreciate you being here and what you've done for me. Still, I feel like I'm being pushed around without understanding what's going on. If it helps, I feel the same. When I started and came to life, all I knew was how to run the ship. Then things went wrong and I had to learn, adapt, and figure things out. Ship? I interrupted. What ship? He looked at me, surprised. Are you serious? The ship we're living in, of course. What other ship would I mean? Ship? I stumbled for words. I've never seen one in real life, but I've read about them. I know what they look like. Well, used to look like when there was more water around. But I haven't seen anything that looks like a ship here or back there. You know what I mean? I understand, he said, nodding and kindly ignoring my rambling. I have to be direct. What you call the palace is really a ship. What? Well, It's not a ship like you think of. It's a spaceship. It was built. You've got to be joking. I know it's a shock for you, and I'm sorry, but you asked for the truth. I don't know much about why it was built. I'm just the ship's computer, so they didn't think I needed all the background info. I think that vessel is some kind of ARC or rescue ship. It was supposed to carry 16,384 people from my home planet. What is the name of your planet? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. I wasn't really interested in the name, to be honest. It's just called home. What happened? Where are those 16,384 people now? I don't know exactly. There was a terrible war happening. The ship launched when it shouldn't have. I couldn't stop it because someone else took control. I still don't know who did it or why. The ship wasn't finished. The lower levels where you live were meant for the passengers, but they are still empty. I didn't realize it at the time, but some of the Dark Ones got onto the ship. They are dangerous machines built for the war that was destroying my home. I suspect my home world is gone now. I was programmed to go to Earth since it might be livable. I couldn't return to my planet, and since I had no passengers, I focused on my own survival. I didn't know what else to do, so I followed the program and traveled to Earth. I landed as planned, but couldn't connect with what you call the advanced civilization. They were not very developed and couldn't even communicate using minds. I can't talk using sounds like they do. That kind of communication was unknown back home, and no one prepared me for that. Sadly, the Dark Ones got off the ship, likely found someone to help them, and started a war that destroyed human civilization. But why? I asked. I guess they are built for war, but I'm not completely sure. It's hard for me to understand them. We share the same language, at least mentally. Their way of thinking is too strange for me, even though we were made by the same beings. I find this hard to believe, I said, unsure why. I had seen so many strange things lately that this didn't feel too surprising. He looked at me patiently. So what's your plan? I finally asked. Well, besides enjoying our time here. You know what I mean? What's the plan for the Dark Ones? For Earth? For your home? I think my homeworld is probably just a wreck now. I'm also pretty sure the Dark Ones I accidentally brought here are dead, except one that was left on the ship for some reason. Your ancestors fought hard to kill 4 of them, but I couldn't help at the time. There were no special humans I could connect with, so I stayed silent. Some of them saw me, but I was just a quiet blue sphere to them, and they had bigger problems. I couldn't let anyone use the weapons unless they could think like me. Allowing people to use them without control would have been like adding fuel to a fire. It took a long time to find messengers who could see and hear from me and help bring back some order. Sadly, some messengers I finally got were not great, as you know. I had to accept that to keep some kind of civilization, but Abigor was too much trouble. He had to go. Earth and the Dark One are linked. With him around, we can't rebuild. We need to be very clever to defeat him. They are strong and smart in their own way. I see, the weapons didn't seem to do much. Right. We must defeat him eventually. Then you need to take charge and lead. You must be joking. I'm just a regular girl. No, you aren't. You are the only one who can do this with my support. We need to work together, even if you don't want to. Ruling that broken world sounds scarier than fighting that creature. You might be right about that. Wait, can't you use the doors to trap him? No, I'm afraid not. The doors cannot lock. That's not how they work. We'll need to find another way. That's frustrating. Yeah, it is. The mood became serious as that sank in. Do you want to explore this world with me? He asked, and I looked at the city in the distance. Absolutely. For some reason, I suddenly felt good to be alive. That was a new feeling for me. Joyful, we both jumped down the hill together. This body felt amazing. It was not just taller than mine, it was strong and fit. I laughed loudly as we raced down the grassy slope, and I could hear him laughing too. We glanced at each other, both feeling so alive, connected, and happy. We calmed down and slowed our pace. My borrowed body hardly felt tired. I could get used to this, but I still hadn't seen my own face. If I looked even close to him, I would be stunning. I glanced at him again and thought his sandy hair seemed longer, just how I liked it. His chin looked sharper, but that was probably just the light. We reached the edge of the city, and I was amazed by how well the houses fit into the landscape. They seemed made from the same rocks as the city. The houses looked modern but simple. Everything was neat, the windows were whole, and there was no trash on the streets. Still, the place felt lifeless. There were no animals and not even a breeze. Nothing moved unless we moved it ourselves. We didn't let anything stop us from exploring the city. It was still interesting enough that I hardly noticed we were holding hands. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" I said to him. "It all seems so still." "Yes, that's because it's a snapshot from my homeworld. We are moving through one moment in time." "So this is what your homeworld looked like. How long ago was that?" "I traveled about 117 years in your time." "Wait, what?" I interrupted. "You did what? You're old enough to be my great-grandfather." He just laughed, and I found it very charming. I could listen to him for a long time. True, but I still look good, right? Anyway, space travel takes a long time. Luckily, my body doesn't age. The blue sphere? Yes. It was very boring, though. Imagine being alone for more than 100 years. "I can imagine," I said, even though we both knew I couldn't. "I was launched just a few months before the ship started. I'm not sure when this snapshot was taken, but it was clearly before a big war. When I left, the world was mostly a ruined mess. But why did that happen if they could have this?" "You tell me. I'm not human, and humans tend to make the same mistakes my builders did." That's true. Should we climb that tower?" "Race you to the top," he said with a grin. "Last one up has to face the music." "You're on," I said, jumping ahead and laughing at how a computer in a blue sphere could have such a funny side. Out of breath, we hugged at the top. No one cared who won as we took in the view of the city. The top was just a flat surface with no railings. We stood at the edge, feeling safe, and the moment was as amazing as the view below. "Have you been here before?" "Yes, but last time I didn't have a body. It felt dull and empty. I needed your brain to feel alive in this body. I didn't want to think about being in a fake world. It would spoil a perfect day. Why this city? Why this grassy hill we woke up on? It's where my creators lived. They were a married couple. They fell in love right on that hill. They saved this memory in my mind." "Oh, that was a little sad. We were inside someone else's special memory. They had loved each other, and now they were gone. It felt a bit wrong." "Don't worry, they left out the personal stuff." I laughed. "Well, then we'll have to make our own memories." "Wait, what did I just say?" "I hoped you'd say that. Let's go see my creator's house. It's a nice place." I decided it was time. This body felt great, and I liked him a lot. "Okay, but just so you know, I haven't done much of this before. I wondered if this body could blush." He laughed, but in a kind way. "Neither have I. Neither have I." That would change soon. I still had no idea what being close to a human was like, and thinking about the other guys around made me wonder if I ever would. But inside this guy's body, it was incredible. I wanted more of this, and that's exactly what we had in those dream moments that followed. I had really grown fond of him. The time we spent together felt special. We didn't need food or water, and there was no pain or sweat. We could focus completely on each other for hours. This was as good as it could be outside. Still, I often thought about being in a fake world, and occasionally I felt the urge to return to reality. He didn't seem to feel that way, but he understood. Returning to reality was always a bit strange. I went back to my old body, and the wonderful dream world disappeared, replaced by the plain blue room. I thought it must be harder for him, switching between a real body and a computer. I knew the man I had feelings for was somewhere in that blue sphere. I wouldn't have felt anything for a blue ball, no matter how smart it was, but his attractive body was another story. I felt a bit shallow, but really, who could love a blue ball, beautiful mind or not? Something had changed, though. He was still with me this time. Like a faint blue light, a part of him was now in me. We had connected enough to keep that link even in reality. I could feel him, and that left me unsure how to feel. Don't overthink it, I thought, or maybe he did. This was starting to feel scary. I didn't want to lose myself. "Why not check out the control room again?" he suggested in my mind. "I can't. I made an agreement with that thing. I don't go there, and it leaves my room alone." "Ha ha, that's funny. The Dark One hates the lower levels anyway. It is very strong, but needs to recharge after a fight. It can keep going if it's not fighting, but it uses a lot of energy when it does. It didn't fight you in your room because the way back to its power source is too far. The risk is too great. It just attacked the butler and left before you woke up. Okay, where is this power source? It uses the reactors closer to the control room. It doesn't like to fight up here either. It prefers the middle levels. Great. Isn't that where you want me to go? Yes, ideally, we could try to destroy the source it gets its power from. Well, there are 5 of them, to be honest. I'm the one risking my life, right? The Dark One has been trying to break my barrier since your late aunt disturbed it. I worried that if I didn't succeed, my time would soon be over too. Without me, the ship would be free to take over the Earth. Great, I muttered. I sighed and told the elevator to take me to the control room level. I wasn't looking forward to it. One chair had already broken, and I had almost been hurt twice. This was not a place full of good memories. I expected to see a new chair, but nothing had changed. The control room looked just like I remembered. My mental friend seemed to be missing too. Typical, I thought. When things get tough, you find yourself alone. Where is it? I asked. It's recharging at socket number 2. Okay, so much for being alone. Where's that? On the other side of the control room. How could such an advanced computer sound afraid? I felt calm compared to how worried it sounded. The control room was bigger than I thought. There were about 20 chairs around. Did you need all those chairs to run the ship? Not really, they're just for show. Normally, with me alive, nothing would be controlled from there. The crew would just watch. Without me, even 20 skilled operators would need to manage everything. I only half listened to the blue floating sphere that represented a man I had feelings for. I was getting used to strange things, I guess. At the end of the room, the thing stood still, a shadow against the wall, lit up in blue from behind. Can't you turn it off? I asked. I can, but I'd have to shut down the whole ship, including myself. I'm not ready to find out if I have an immortal soul just yet. Great, I murmured, even though I wasn't shocked. I didn't expect it to be easy. It never was. What's the plan? It asked. Plan? What plan? I thought you'd tell me what to do. This is totally insane. Even if I shoot it 1,000 times, it can just recharge. You're right. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. Hold on, I said, turning around and trying to sneak away. Aren't you some super smart being? I can't believe you brought me here without a plan. Sorry, but I'm not trained to fight. That's nonsense. You guided me when I fought, and those people would say I did a good job killing them. I wanted to hear his reply, but the angry noise behind me distracted me. I didn't want to act recklessly, but I started to run as fast as I could. It would have helped to know where to run. The thing was fully charged, and I guessed it was not happy with me. Without looking back, I jumped into the elevator, telling it to take me down to my room. Instead, it shot up. I hated those kinds of tricks. I heard strange scratching sounds below the platform. I didn't expect visitors attacking in the elevator, so it might be the thing. Not sure what else to do, I ran to the blue room. I hoped the blue sphere would help me feel calm, but it didn't. I really wished to be back in that old, ruined village. Even the messenger station seemed better. It wasn't perfect, but there were hardly any killer machines there. For the downfall of one queen, perhaps one killer would be enough. Slowly, the thing moved toward me down the hallway. I sensed it was coming. I thought about trying to hide again, but I felt that wouldn't work a second time. No, I had to face my end. I seemed to be getting used to that. Finally, the thing stood at the end of the hallway, staring at me. No eyes didn't stop it from watching. It grinned cruelly, even without a mouth. One long arm lifted with a sharp claw at the end. I fired my weapon. The claw hit the shield protecting the blue sphere. I aimed again, moving closer. It hit the shield once more, and I thought I felt it shake. It was nice knowing you. I'll die when the shield falls, my friend told me. The elevator can still work, but almost nothing else will. Get away now while you can. I love you. I fired again, and while it hit the shield again, I shocked everyone, including myself, by charging forward. The first claw was still bouncing off the shield while the other reached out to me. I caught a glimpse of its mind. It was focused on the fight. This was what it was made for, and it was enjoying it. My death was certain, and it looked forward to it. But I had different plans. I pulled out a small dagger and stabbed it in its groin. I didn't aim for that spot. It just happened to be where I ended up. Surprisingly, the dagger went through its armor much better than my gun. I felt the thing groan. It was more angry than hurt. Sadly, that didn't stop its other arm from attacking. I tried to duck, but it didn't work. I was too close. The arm slammed into me and knocked me against the shield. Stunned, I watched as the thing prepared to deliver the final blow. I used my legs to push myself away from the shield and slid right under it, stabbing its leg as I passed. We faced each other once more. I was out of breath, and the strange being was hurt. We both knew one of us wouldn't leave this room alive. I had a good idea of who it would be, but I wasn't going to make it easy for it. I thought it would come at me, but instead it turned and began to break the barrier again. With one hit, the barrier broke apart like thin glass. "No!" I yelled, feeling foolish. "As you are, I once was." The being's voice echoed in my mind, sounding proud. "Aunt," I stammered, shocked. "You didn't see that coming, did you, my sweet, naive niece? You shouldn't believe everything you think you see. Just before I died, someone new offered me shelter." But before it could say more, a huge blue ball crashed into its back. I didn't think a ball could do much, but it pushed the being across the room and into the wall next to me. My friend might be a bit heavy. I would talk to him about that later, but for now, his size was helpful. The being raised its arm to strike me. "No, you won't," I thought, stepping on its knee and jumping high enough to reach its head with my outstretched hand and a small, glowing dagger. I didn't know if it would work, but the dagger went through its skull like it was soft. To my surprise, the being just froze. It was like it had turned to stone, and its presence vanished from my mind. I hope it's finally gone. Either I was getting used to these battles, or my heart was still racing with adrenaline. Either way, I felt surprisingly calm. I think so. That worked pretty well. "Wait, was that your plan? Why didn't you tell me?" "It wouldn't have worked back then. Honestly, I didn't expect the barrier to break. I didn't think I would survive. I only thought it was best to confront it up here, so I needed you to wake it up and lead it here. I can help you with your weapons best up here, as you're closer and the Dark One couldn't recharge quickly." "So you can stay on Earth?" "Surprisingly, yes. But I will need to recharge up here sometimes. Let's go." I followed him to the elevator room. A big door I hadn't noticed before was open, leading to a hall with a big surprise, a large window. As I looked through it, I found I could zoom in on anything I wanted. I could see villagers in pain, each wound, each scar, each sad eye. For the first time since I left the station, I thought about my parents. I had been busy, but I needed to make sure they were okay and let them know I was alive. Everywhere I looked, the world was hurt and suffering. I saw the messengers trying hard to stop the worst from happening, but they couldn't make anything better. That wasn't surprising. You can't send someone out with just a gun and expect them to fix or build anything. "That's our job," I said. Yes. Now the real work starts. We could do it. I felt strong. I felt sure of myself. I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. We had fought the worst and won. Together we would turn this broken world into something beautiful, just like our dream world. True, I had no idea how to do that, and I suspected that my blue friend didn't either. But I had been lost since I left the station, and things had worked out so far. Maybe not knowing everything wasn't so bad. Maybe just being myself and staying alive was better than having a plan. Hey, audience! If you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.